Jump scare is a good idea, but I don't think I'm going to do a jump scare today. So let me go ahead. Let's bring the music down. Let's get this party started. Let's talk a little bit about horror. I'm going to talk about some other things before we get started. Some news, some noise, all that kind of good stuff to just let you guys know what's going on with YouTube, because there's been some recent developments, and I want to go through that and just talk about a little bit of the future of what might be happening on this platform and other platforms. Hopefully you guys are having a great day. Welcome to the Writestream, where we just talk about writing, various kinds of IP, things like that. I'm a little bit catching a cold today. I don't know if I'm just having like a bunch of allergies, but I've been coughing nonstop. I was working outside and in the garage, so I might have like choked on some dust, and now I'm coughing. But I expect to be able to go the full length, which is going to be hopefully less than 2 hours. But we will see how far I can go here. Now, I do want to say, before I get into the topic today of like, horror, YouTube, if you have been, maybe you don't keep up with YouTube, maybe you do, maybe you're thinking of being a creator, but all this stuff's important, whether you like to look at creators on YouTube, or whether you like to actually be a creator on YouTube, if you are one, or you're planning on being one. This is stuff that will probably impact you in the long run, and certainly will impact me. And that is what's being called right now the Vox adpocalypse. I'll give you the Reader's Digest version. You can take it from there and look a little deeper. But basically, Vox, which is I guess let's call them a leftist mainstream media outlet. I know I repeat myself, but they got a little bit upset over Steven Crowder's constant debunking of, I guess, one particular writer. So they went after him, but in the process, basically a huge amount of demonetizations and removal of channels has happened over the last 24 hours. A large number of people are affected. Now, my expectation is that eventually that'll affect me, of course. And when that happens, I'll let you know, but it's part of the plan. The whole point of this is to move the goalposts closer. And I want to read a little bit of a blog post that YouTube put out and give you some analysis on that and what that means. This is not anything that's unexpected. It's not even happening ahead of schedule. They're doing this now because this way they can eliminate people who influence thought well ahead of the 2020 elections, where if you did it closer to the 2020 elections, you might have this Streisand effect spike, which could work against you. So you want to do things early. You want to take people out early. Steven Crowder, who is the target of Vox, of course they've targeted PewDiePie for years with slander, because they hate YouTube. Now, here's the thing about Vox. Vox, as a traditional media outlet, sells advertising. So if YouTube goes away and stops taking people's attention, then they benefit, as does all of the legacy media that broadcasts on TV, through cable, things like that. So the less user-generated content there is, the better it is for the regular outlets who pay people to produce content, but also pay to gain access to different things. They are essentially paying to play. That's one of the ways that Facebook works, if you've paid attention to things I've talked about with Facebook. With Facebook, you don't... if you make a Facebook page, you won't get any viral traffic. It's literally impossible. You have to pay for traffic. So the reason that you see Huffington Post and Vox articles all the time on Facebook is not just because your friends are lefties. They see it more than other things because those outlets literally pay for the promotion. So everything kind of goes back around in a big cycle. Anyway, so Steven Crowder, who's, I guess, he's a conservative comedian, his channel got demonetized, but a whole bunch of others got demonetized. Now, a couple months ago, Owen Benjamin, who's another comedian and is a, quote, conservative, he got his channel demonetized. And he just said, that's part of the process. That's part of the... that's part of the whole thing. Now, I'm still monetized as of right now, but that could change at any time. And this is one of the things, is that YouTube what they'll do with even individual videos, they'll demonetize my individual videos and never notify me. It's going to be distantly in the past, and I can only find out well after the fact. And they do this for a couple reasons. So they demonetize it, and then they have a requirement like, we'll only think about remonetizing videos that have had 1,000 views in the last like 7 days. Well, my legacy content gets most of its views the first few days, as most creators do. So that means that even though that content might generate 100,000 views over 2 years, it may never meet the requirement to get the right number of views for them to put the ads back on it. So if I'm losing 50,000, 100,000 views on a video over the course of a couple years, that's actually that's actually like hundreds of dollars kind of flushed down the toilet. And it's kind of intentional. Now, the thing is, whenever they turn off ads, they turn off their own revenue for the video. So it harms them as well. It's a very, very odd strategy. And right now what we're experiencing is a bit of a scorched earth reaction. When this channel becomes demonetized, I don't know what I will do with it. I may still continue to upload videos to it. I may not. If the channel gets deleted, obviously I'll be gone. But I will try in the next few days to keep everybody posted about my other channels. Right? I do have a gaming channel which you can follow, which is going to be only gaming content. I haven't really interacted with it in a few months because I've got too much other stuff going on to put all my gaming content on that. But eventually all the gaming content will live on that channel as well as this one. And when this channel gets removed or gets demonetized, that channel will remain. It's actually completely separate from my Google account and everything like that. So if they delete my Google account, I'll still have some content up to get some attention from people through gaming content. Let me go ahead. Let's look at a couple of these specific things that YouTube has talked about. So the first one is actually an official blog. So let me see if I can bring this up for you guys. We'll take a look at it, and I'll give you my little analysis of exactly what they're saying and what you can expect from this. So let's look. Here it is. The official blog, our ongoing work to tackle hate. Now, hatred towards, conservatives or really anyone that's not a Maoist, they don't do that. There's still plenty of Antifa videos. There's videos calling for like the death of Christians and whoever else knows. That stuff's going to be safe. What they mean by hate is anyone who disagrees with the leftist perspective. And we can judge that basically by the outcomes, by those they demonetize and those they remove. One of the channels they removed, by the way, before I start looking at this, is actually Varg Vikernes' channel, Thulian Perspective. Thulian Perspective, if you don't know who Varg is, he was a black metal musician in the early 90s. He went to prison for manslaughter because he killed another black metal musician during a violent conflict they had. And he spent the maximum amount of time in Norway jail, and he lives in the French countryside with a family of like 7 kids now. So they got rid of his channel. That's one that I know they got rid of. Anyway, let me read this, and I'll give you a couple clues as to what this actually means. Because kind of like with Newspeak, you always speak in code. And one of the reasons there's no strict or specific code of language or action on YouTube is because they don't want it to be strict. They want it to be variable so that it's essentially up to their discretion what violates the rules and what doesn't. It doesn't have to be consistent. So here we go. Over the past few years, we've been investing in the policies, resources, and products needed to live up to our responsibility and protect the YouTube community from harmful content. Now, technically, under U.S. law, they have a responsibility to the shareholders, and so if they are reducing the value of their stock or their company, they could have a fiduciary responsibility, which means they could get sued. This work is focused on 4 pillars: removing violative content, right? Raising up authoritative content, reducing the spread of borderline content, and rewarding trusted creators. So here's what they mean by violative content, whatever they decide. Here's what they mean by authoritative content. CNN, right? And CNN is a conspiracy theory network at this point. They went with the Russiagate conspiracy for over 2 years. at this point. It was a joke from the beginning to anybody who could see through it or anybody who bothered to read anything with the WikiLeaks stuff. And they just continued with it. And even when it all came up as completely bunk, they continued with it. And they haven't, SJW's always doubled down, as Vox Day would say. So that's what they mean by authoritative content, is CNN and mainstream media outlets. The fact that these mainstream media outlets engage in doxing children, and you can read my article called the 5 phases, or it's not the 5 phases. There's 5 phases of corporate IP ownership. Of course, you should read, but it's also the fake news formula in 5 steps is what it's called, and it breaks down exactly what they do and how they do it, how they actually execute, convincing people that there's a reality that literally doesn't exist. This is what the mainstream media does. I've documented it on this channel, and I put it into writing so you can recognize that pattern whenever it happens. It's called the fake news formula in 5 steps. In fact, I could probably look it up here on whatever. I'll look it up. I'll look it up later and give you a link some other time if you want. Here's what I really wanted to talk about with this is borderline content. So borderline content means content which doesn't violate the rules. But it does mean content that comes close to violating the rules, right? So the whole point of the idea of borderline content is that now you can get pinged, or you can get banned, or you can get demonetized, not for breaking the rules, for adhering to the rules under a strict standard, but there are no strict standards to the rules. So if they think that it's too close to the edge of that Overton window, boom, it's gone. And rewarded trusting creators, that means that they're going to promote the channels that they want to promote. So this whole idea that that you get sold with YouTube, and that I was sold with YouTube years ago and just sold with the internet, is that you're going to have this corner of the internet that's going to be yours, where you can create the art and the content that you want to create, and you can attract the audience that is interested in that, and you're going to be free to be yourself and to live as yourself. What a gigantic lie that has turned out to be. The whole thing now is that they're going to continue to rig the game harder and harder. What they're going to do is, rather than give you an algorithm which shows you the things that you want to see, which is how you probably found this channel, how you probably found lots of the channels that you like, they're instead going to pack that side with what they want you to see. That's what rewarding trusted creators really means. Thanks to these investments, videos that violate our policies are removed faster than ever, and users are seeing less borderline content and harmful misinformation. As we do this, now harmful misinformation, what exactly does that mean? I remember news shows telling people for years that they shouldn't eat fat. Now they have diabetes. Is that harmful misinformation? How about the food pyramid, which told you to eat 7 servings of grains a day, which will make you fat? As we do this, we're partnering closely with lawmakers and civil society around the globe to limit the spread of violent extremist content online. Now, extremist is a very important word as well. The whole thing about the word extremist or extremism, there is no such thing as extremism. Extremism is not quantifiable. Extremism just means you really believe something. Ayn Rand talked about this 60 years ago. She says, of course I'm an extremist. Extremist just means you earnestly believe the things which you believe. That's what an extremist is. So by classifying extremism as bad, anybody that earnestly believes something or is 100% committed to a position is an extremist, and that's bad, right? What you want is people who are flip-floppy centrists, unless they're a hard leftist, then it's probably okay. But you want people who are flip-floppy centrists, so nobody feels like they have any strong convictions. There's no strong convictions from the right allowed on YouTube, and there's also some strong convictions from the left that are really not allowed as well. We review our policies on an ongoing basis to make sure we are drawing the line in the right place. In 2018 alone, now drawing the line in the right place, people who have apolitical content are getting their channels demonetized right now. In 2018 alone, we've made more than 30 policy updates. That's not a good thing. That's actually a really bad thing. We don't want policy updates if you're a creator, or really if you're a viewer. What we want is a consistent policy we can expect to remain in place for a long time, so we can plan for the future. So if I make a video tonight, or if I make a stream tonight, and the rules change, the policy changes next week, all of a sudden I lose what I have because I wasn't informed. That's the thing, is that all these changes are retroactive. You lose monetization on videos retroactively. You lose monetization on your channel due to retroactive violations. You get your channel banned retroactively with really no recourse. One of the most complex and constantly evolving areas we deal with is hate speech. We've been taking a closer look at our approach towards hateful content in consultation with dozens of experts in subjects like violent extremism, supremacism, civil rights, and free speech. Based on those learnings, we are making several updates. We are removing more hateful and supremacist content from YouTube. What does supremacist really mean? Right? They mean white supremacists is what they want you to believe that. But they just drop the white part off so that it seems like inclusive, as though there's some other group of supremacists besides white supremacists. YouTube has always had rules of the road. That's not entirely true, including a long-standing policy against hate speech. But of course, hate speech has never been clearly defined. Are there words you can't use? What is hate speech? In 2017, we introduced a tougher stance towards videos with supremacist content, including limiting recommendations and features like comments and the ability to share the video. So again, it's like, I could go to my corner of the internet and I can have my audience that wants to interact with me. No, that's a lie. No one allowed to comment, no one allowed to share. If you're not allowed to comment or share, what's the point of having it on YouTube? It just means it's a banned video. This step dramatically reduced views to these videos on average 80%. So if you do anything that's controversial, no one will see it. That's the goal. They're being upfront with it, at least. Today, we're taking another step in our hate speech policy by specifically prohibiting videos alleging that a group is superior in order to justify discrimination. So any video that alleges that Jews have a higher IQ than whites, is that supremacist? What about that East Asians have a higher IQ than whites? Is that supremacist? What does that mean? What does superior mean? If you mention, Europeans are on average taller than people in China, it's like, well, is that supremacist? What does that mean? It doesn't really mean anything specific other than what people think is obvious, which is like, we need to exterminate some other race that's not me, can really just mean anything they want it to mean. To justify discrimination, segregation, or exclusion based on qualities like age, gender, race, caste, religion, sexual orientation, or veteran status. I don't think that they're going to apply this to the people who are like, die cis scum. I don't think that works. It's really only white supremacists. This would include, for example, videos that promote or glorify Nazi ideology, which is inherently discriminatory. Nazi ideology also includes public education, full pensions. There's a whole bunch of stuff in Nazi ideology, because people don't know anything about National Socialism, that is just included in the Western canon of ideological stances that people like, especially on the left. Nazism is mostly a leftist ideology. It's socialist. And so all of those Nazi ideological points would actually be talking points of the left. And you can go down the list. There's like the 20 points from the National Socialist Party back in the, I think, 1930s. I don't remember the exact year. You can look at it, and almost every point, besides like the expelling Jews and stuff like that, almost every single point is like modern Democrat Party, almost to a T, with the exception of like that education ought to include practical education. So that's kind of a no-no. You can't teach people how to weld. Finally, we will remove content denying that well-documented violent events like the Holocaust or the shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary took place. This one, this is one that they've caught heat on because Alex Jones said that they were like crisis actors or something at Sandy Hook, or alluded to that fact. I think I said Alex Jones's name. I might lose the stream, and if I do, I really do apologize for that. They can't ban Shapiro. They won't ban him. We recognize some of this content has value to researchers and NGOs looking to understand hate in order to combat it. Now, NGOs, that's like Southern Poverty Law Center. These are these anti-Christian think tanks that basically can decide whether a video should be removed or not. So the authorities really handed off to political organizations like the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is a bad group. I don't like them. and we're exploring options to make it available to them in the future. As always, context matters, so some videos could remain up because they discuss topics like pending legislation, aim to condemn or expose hate, or provide analysis of current events. We will be enforcing this updated policy today. However, it will take time for our systems to fully ramp up, and we'll be gradually expanding coverage over the next several months. Reducing borderline content. So this goes through what borderline content means. We want to reduce the spread of content that comes right up to the line. So this is content which doesn't violate it, but comes close and therefore violates it. There's a word for this, and maybe one of you that's watching actually can remember this word. But basically, it's like you can try someone for a crime they didn't commit because they committed something close enough to it they might as well have. Like, suppose that you wanted to try someone for manslaughter because they drank beer and might have gone to their car, right? That's like what it would be, borderline content. So this is the same idea. We piloted an update of our systems in the U.S. to limit recommendations of borderline content and harmful misinformation, such as videos promoting phony miracle cures for serious illness or claiming that the earth is flat. We're looking to bring this updated system to more countries by the end of 2019. Now, the thing about the flat earth stuff is I don't think the earth is flat, but I think that content should be fine to exist because people need to know the arguments for and against. Now, if you never see the flat earth content, then nobody ever makes a video that explains why the earth is a globe. There's never that discussion. So the people who can be convinced that the earth is flat, they'll be convinced somewhere else, possibly, and then there's no other group of people that's committed to having a discussion there, to providing counterpoints. We're looking to bridge this updated system to more countries. Oh, great. Thanks to this change, the number of views this type of content gets from the recommendations has dropped by over 50% in the US. Our systems are also getting smarter about what types of videos should get this treatment, and we'll be able to apply it to even more borderline videos moving forward. As we do this, we'll also so the borders will shift. We'll be able to, we'll also start raising up more authoritative content in the recommendations, building on the changes we made to news last year. For example, if a user is watching a video that comes close to violating our policies, our systems may include more videos from authoritative sources like top news channels in the Watch Next panel. So if you're providing, let's say you're providing reporting and it shows that CNN and those other networks were a bunch of liars when it came to the Covington Catholic boys. Well, then the recommended videos, the next video that's going to play up in the auto queue is CNN talking about this smug white supremacist harassing the poor American Indian gentleman. That's what you're going to see. Continue to reward trusted creators. We basically already talked about this. But that's basically what you get, is that trusted creators will get pushed up more, and the people who they violate are not going to get their views. They're not going to show up in the algorithm. So I've always said that there's actually I've noticed this with my channel. There's a really strong correlation between the demonetization of a video and how many views it gets. So when it's monetized, boom, the videos will the views will be going through the roof, and as soon as it gets demonetized, no more views. Nobody will watch it. Now, they say that they don't do that, but I know that they do it because I've seen it. I've witnessed it. So if you get your video or your channel demonetized, it's a massive throttle on who can actually see your content. Because it gets demonetized due to violating those policies, it's just going to get thrown down at the bottom and no one's going to see it unless you're promoting it on some other outlet, in which case, what's the point? Why would you give YouTube traffic? Give BitChute traffic. They're much better. Anyway, I wanted to read that to you guys. There's also this one, YouTube to remove thousands of videos pushing extreme views. Same idea, right? So somebody sent me this on Twitter, and I do appreciate it. Let me go ahead and read a little bit of the chat here, and then I'd like to maybe move on to the actual topic of this kind of stuff. Before I read the chat, I just want to tell you, don't forget to follow me on BitChute. Usually the channel's linked in the discussion box, so click it, subscribe to me on BitChute. If you can move over to BitChute for most of your video viewing, do that. There's some other options that are coming out that I'll keep you informed on once I research them, that will allow you to get notifications for your subscriptions across all of the different platforms: YouTube, Twitch, BitChute, even Twitter. all of these different, or like SoundCloud, all of these different platforms, so that you can know when a creator actually does something on a different platform that you may actually want to view or interact with or do something with. So I'll keep you posted on that. But for now, make sure if there's anyone that you actually like watching on YouTube that you follow them in some other way. Be on my mailing list, dvspress.com/list, or follow me on BitChute, and that's really, really helpful to me and to everybody else. Let's take a look at some of the chat. Let's see here. Sorry for all the noise at the beginning. So Matt D says it would be seriously bummed if I get banned. I'll stream on some other thing. I'll do Streamlabs or something like that. But it's not a question of if, but when, or how long it's going to take, because even though I'm very polite, I don't lie. And so it's kind of like the mark of the beast. If you're not willing to say that, the truth is a lie, you're risking losing your economic abilities. Now, if I did get banned, or I did get demonetized, it changed a lot what I do. It's a little bit depressing for me to think about, because I enjoy doing this content, and I don't make a lot of money doing it right now. My money has gone down and down and down as my views have gone up and up and up. So I don't know how that works, but that's what's been happening. From the archiver, right-wing purge is real when the YouTube CEO Susan Wojcicki tells Ben Shapiro, one of today's most milquetoast conservatives, he should be banned. Yeah, that's it. I mean, Ben Shapiro, he's a little bit, acidic. I don't know what you want to call him, but he's not. He's certainly not extreme. I would consider him a moderate, maybe just to the right of moderate. I don't really consider him a really strong right-winger. He likes to punch right a lot, and he's quite happy to call other people alt-right or call people Nazis or something. It's kind of interesting, though, that people are like, Ben Shapiro's a Nazi. It's like, the Jew is a Nazi. It should be an obvious one where it's like, Donald Trump is super anti-Semitic. It's like his daughter's married to a Jew, and he's very well liked in Israel. I don't think he's very anti-Jewish, and he's from New York. There's a lot of Jews in New York. It's really hard to be an anti-Semite and do business in New York. That is, to actually actively not like Jews. Today's subject, horror. Join and see discussion of YouTube's mission statement. Yes. Swords and shotguns. What's the best way to create psychological horror, since the main character may not have the same fears and trauma than the readers? That's a great question. I'll get to that in a minute. They do love the word authoritative. Authoritative is whatever they say it is. Why is CNN authoritative? They had enough money to make a network. That's why they're authoritative. No one bequeathed upon them authority. God did not come down and say, CNN, you are the truth. And if you judge them by what they do nothing but lie. And they're even worse than that. MSNBC too, or CNBC. I can't even keep track of all of them. I haven't watched cable news in forever. They give out financial advice on like these Mad Money shows, and it's all bad. It's pretty much all bad. So I wouldn't trust them with my money. I would trust somebody who's successful with it. World of Geekdom says, we love you, David, and don't worry, just saying AJ's name doesn't run the stream unless you promote his stuff. I don't. I like that Alex Jones exists. I just don't really agree with him on anything. How would you go about writing fantasy horror in a fairy tale-like manner? I can get to that. How can I overcome procrastination and apathy? Force yourself to do something. Create habits. It is really the best way. So everything's like bodybuilding. That's how I like to think about it. Let's talk about some positive stuff. Everything's like bodybuilding. So if you want to build a body, the outcome of a body, whatever your physical arrangement is the outcome of all your decisions. It's the sum total of your decisions. If you decide to eat well, then you make a positive body gain, and if you decide not to eat well, you make a negative body gain. So you gain weight, or you lose strength, or something else that's now optimal happens to you. So every day that you eat well, you get healthier and leaner and better and stronger. And every day that you eat poorly, you get fatter and weaker and more tired and things like that. So your health, your body, all of that's the sum total of your decisions. When you write a book, that's the sum total of your decisions too. So if you sit down every day to write, you sit down every day to work, or you sit down a certain number of days per week to work, that's what's going to end up making a lot more progress for you if you're a procrastinator than if you are trying to do it when you feel it, for instance. One of the things, that I learned, through a body transformation process that happened and now like 6 or 7 years ago, where I lost a huge amount of weight, like 100 pounds. I need to dig up some of the old pictures because you guys would be like dumbfounded by how fat I was. It's just all those decisions. I made the gym a habit that I never skipped. I made my diet a habit that I couldn't avoid. And actually, I've lost a little bit over 20 pounds since my daughter was born about 9 weeks ago, and I'd spent a couple weeks not dieting. But I just set up a diet, set up a meal plan that's what it is. I have a baby, so I can't really go out and like get Jack in the Box. I got Jack in the Box the other week, and it like made me sick. So I just eat the same food every day, and boom, the sum total of those decisions, you lose weight and get stronger and better. Likewise, don't skip the gym, things like that. So if you make writing or whatever you're trying to accomplish, if you make that part of your daily habit and you never skip it, then the outcomes that you want are going to just naturally arrive. If you write 1,000 words a day, after 100 days, your novel's done. You are done writing that book, and you have done what most people can't do, which is finish a book. I've said this before. Most people never finish a book. They want to. They have ideas. They want to be an author. They want to be creative, and then they can't finish it. And it's not because they're not creative. It's not because they're stupid. It's just because they don't make that series of decisions. So you got to make it a habit. Say, I'm not going to go to sleep unless I write 1,000 words, whether they suck or not, and just do it. The other way that you can do it is what I call the boot camp mentality, which is you can do anything for 30 days. 30 days is the max, but you can do anything for a limited amount of time. I say 30 days is the max. Probably like 6 weeks if you want to take it to extremes. 6 weeks, if you look at if you look at BUDS, which is the Navy SEAL kind of indoctrination program, it's this boot camp mentality. It's super intense for a limited duration of time to transform you and to test you. So your body can do a lot of things that you wouldn't think are possible for a short amount of time. You can endure extreme pain for a short amount of time. When pain becomes unbearable is when it's not just a short amount of time. Like if somebody punches you in the arm, that hurts. The pain goes away relatively quickly. If somebody pinches your arm and continues pinching it and twisting it, it may not hurt a whole lot at first, but like after a minute, it's unbearable. So if you think about somebody who maybe has fibromyalgia or like some significant pain issue, some kind of nerve issue, the duration of the pain is usually more significant than the intensity of the pain. And where those intersect ends up becoming like the breaking point. If the pain's intense and it lasts a really long time, like a migraine headache, that's when migraines become unbearable. So they last a really long time. If you get bonked in the head by a baseball, that hurts for a while, but it goes away. So in other words, you can endure something for a limited amount of time. So if you say, I'm going to write 5,000 words a day, I'm going to push myself to the max, and I'm going to write a book in 30 days, which I've done. You can do that. And then at the end of that 30 days, if your book is complete, you can stop that level of intensity and go back to your daily habits. So if I were going to do like another boot camp book write, which I did for Neil Ash for this book, I wrote this in 30 days. Actually, a little bit more, about 40 days for the entire thing. And I published it in less than 60 days. If I were going to do that again, I'd have to drop a bunch of the stuff I do, right? I can't go to the gym as often. I can't do as many YouTube videos. You have to cut back on a lot of the other stuff to focus intensely. That's the other thing you can do, because then it's not so much procrastination. You're doing it hard for a really short amount of time, and then you can procrastinate as much as you want after that. And then the last thing I'll say is sometimes procrastination is good. If you procrastinate on things that don't matter, there's no negative. So let's say you need to mow the lawn and you procrastinate on mowing the lawn, which I often do, or doing the dishes or something like that. Not mowing the lawn doesn't have any negative impact unless there's a legal ordinance that requires you to mow the lawn. you know. So you can procrastinate on that until the lawn is so long you can't stand it. Then you just mow it. And you've probably mowed the lawn less times than if you didn't procrastinate. So procrastination can sometimes be good. The whole like you gotta clean your room Jordan Peterson thing, I'm not with that. I'd say clean your room when it's stopping you from functioning, for sure. Or when it bothers you, but you don't need to keep your room spick and span, because you're going to spend all your time cleaning your room and none of your time being effective in the world. Archiver, did you hear about how Russia is celebrating Pride Month? Russian movie distributors have removed all the gay sex scenes from the Rocket Man film. Seems pretty based and red pill to me. I don't know about that. I'm into free expression, and they should be able to show that. So I'm not into censorship, even on any side. What are your favorite horror films, or what horror films would you recommend to any newcomers? That's a great question. Besides Hereditary and The Watch, are there any horror movies you recommend? I've never seen either one of those. But I'll talk a little bit about... I don't watch a whole lot of horror movies. And that's because I just never have an opportunity to watch them. No one I know likes horror. Everybody hates it. So I just don't really watch it very much. I read horror more often than watch it. But there's definitely an art to a great horror movie, and I'll talk about some of that. Okay. Is a horror story the same as science fiction, more about the ideas rather than the plot or characters? A little bit, yeah. It's more about the execution. It's good horror tends to be about the micro, not the macro. So let's jump into our lecture on horror. So horror is any genre, or really any moment that you want to have in your work, which centers on producing feelings like fear, uneasiness, disgust, emotions that we might consider negative emotions apart from sadness. Sadness is the result of tragedy. Horror produces primarily fear. And depending on what medium you're in, you're going to execute this differently. Let's start with movies, because I know everybody watches movies and we have a good idea of this. Horror movies, I should say horror in general, regardless of what genre you're in, is about much more of the micro level than the macro level, meaning the macro plot structure is much less important to a horror story than how you actually execute each individual scene. How you execute each individual scene is so much more important in horror than the total. So if you're looking at, trying to have some kind of save the cat plot or, hero's journey kind of thing in a horror story, there's no reason to. You can do it, but you don't have to. It's not going to improve the effect of the story really at all. It's mostly going to, it won't impact it negatively if you avoid something like that, and it may not impact it positively. When you are doing a horror movie, the main way that you provoke fear is by creating tension, which the viewer must wait for it to be resolved. As Alfred Hitchcock once said, there is no terror in the bang, only in the anticipation of the bang. What that really means is that a gun firing at someone, that's not frightening. What's frightening is not knowing whether the gun will fire or when the gun shot will go off, but believing it ought to go off. If you were to take your camera and you center in on a dark corner of the room, and you just have the camera maybe slowly zooming towards this dark area, what does that do to the viewer? And I'm aware this is not a writing technique, this is cinematography, but in a visual medium, you should be thinking about this kind of stuff. So the camera slowly zooms in, or you could do an effect where you put the camera on a like a dolly. You push it forward while you zoom out, which creates this very, very disorienting effect. But let's say you're doing that with the dark. Well, the audience is going to expect something to emerge from that darkness. Now, what's going to emerge from that darkness and in what way it's going to emerge, the audience doesn't know, but they start to try to predict. Everything that we do when we're thinking about stories, when we're watching stories, or just living life, it's all predictive. We're trying to predict what's going to happen next. So we think, okay, something's going to hop out of that dark. Is it going to be a monster? What's the monster going to look at? Is he going to hop at my face? Is he going to first show his teeth? Things like that. So one of the ways that you can undo the effect of that is that you focus on that darkness and then you start to see the monster come out immediately. And right away the tension's gone. So primarily in horror movies, it's all about having that tension be present. One of my favorite horror movies, and in fact, I think the one that is actually one of the best ever made, is actually a sci-fi horror movie. That's Alien, the original Alien by Ridley Scott. Not only does it do all of the things that horror needs to do, but it does the main thing that horror does well in the micro, which is it prolongs the feeling of tension. You have Dallas going through the ventilation system. You have them trying to communicate with him. He's trying to find this alien. He doesn't know what to expect. And when you finally see it, when you've been waiting this whole time for it to happen, when you finally see it, it's just a flash of this monster that H.R. Geiger created. Not enough time for you to actually see it and to understand its form. You see its teeth, you see a hand, then it's gone. That's the resolution of it, and it's a fearful resolution that makes you jump out of your seat. So movies are great at making you jump out of your seat. You're not going to do that with books. The other thing that horror can do besides create this tension, the tension ends up being fear. It ends up being fear in the minds of the people, and then the hopping out of your seat, that's your reaction to the fear that's already there. So jumping out of your seat isn't the fear, it's the reaction to fear. So Alien does this really well, but Alien also does another thing that the horror movies tend to do well, and modern horror has gone more towards this direction, which is towards the grotesque, rather than just using tension and resolution to create fear. They use grotesqueness to create disgust added into it. I think a great example is probably Saw, or like Human Centipede 2, Hostel, some of the newer ones, right? Rather than drawing out the tension and making you wonder what's in the dark corner, they show you a lot of gore and a lot of things which are just disturbing to see, disturbing images which make you feel sick, which make you question the form of the human body and things like that. That's kind of what things have developed into. And I'm not going to say whether that's good or bad. It's just a different effect from classic horror. Classic horror is centered around fear and tension. Kaku, $2 super chat. So good horror is tension crafted with finesse. I think so. And I think the better the finesse, the better the way that you micro it, at least with movies, the better the effect is. So Alien is probably one of the best. If you want to think of a non-horror movie that has just absolutely great horror elements, it's Jurassic Park. I know maybe people aren't thinking like Jurassic Park's not a horror movie, but it's really a sci-fi horror movie. It's full of great horror moments, and it's great at tension. One of the best tension scenes. It's just almost a cliche at this point to even think of this scene, is when the kids are hiding in the kitchen and the raptors are there, and you see like the raptor face pop up against the window and breathe, but they're safe, and then the raptor starts to slowly turn the handle. And then you have this struggle, and then they finally like put the lock in it. Or the point where like the raptor's running straight towards him finally, and then he like hits the reflection, and then they get away. So all of those are really, really good horror moments. There's one where they're in the dark corridor looking for Samuel L. Jackson's character, and out pops this arm. Oh, it's just you, right? So you're waiting like, is a dinosaur going to pop out and eat him? Oh, nope, it's Samuel L. Jackson's character. And then she moves away, and it's a severed arm. It's a severed arm, and it's a horrible, disgusting moment. So you think that you get it resolved, and boom, then you don't get it resolved. It just becomes more and more tension. And it's just great with that. So those are two really great Uber examples. Both by masters. One by Steven Spielberg, one by Ridley Scott, and they do the horror elements well. It's all about the tension. Of course, classic Hitchcock films, Psycho, one of my favorites for that as well. I like a lot of the 80s horror stuff too. Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th kind of stuff, Halloween. All that stuff's fine, but you start to have this loss of the finesse, as Kaku put it. You lose the touch of the micro, and it starts being about scary images and frightening looking things like Freddy Krueger, rather than about wondering what you're going to see. Now let's move from that, and let's move over into to writing. So if you were writing a book, before I move on, if you're writing a screenplay for horror, because this is important, you want to give any director or producer that's reading it the ability to understand how the tension needs to be drawn out. So you can put lots of directions between dialogue. You know, and you could describe it like this. Let's maybe describe that corridor scene in Jurassic Park. You know, she waits, and her flashlight is trembling, and as she calls into the darkness, she hears something and she turns around and backs up into the grate, and then, I don't remember Samuel L. Jackson's character, but the hand falls on her. A beat. You could put a beat. Line, a beat, another line. Oh, it's just you. There's the dialogue. She moves away from the grate, revealing that it's Samuel L. Jackson's severed hand with blood flowing everywhere in a horrific sight. She screams. Okay, that's how you'd write it. And I want to point that out because you want that writing to be able to translate into action and cinematography in a way that's going to produce the tension that you want. But a horror is actually one of the hardest things, I think, to execute. As far as editing and cinematography go, it's the most dependent on how you execute your editing and cinematography. This editing, the cinematography, the choice of how you shoot, what you shoot, the lighting, all of that stuff is so much more important for horror than it is for virtually any other genre, perhaps with the exception of just like high concept action, where you got to have great cinematography as well. But the moment to moment way that you draw out the tension is so important in movies because that's where it comes from. Now, when you're writing a book, you don't have the advantage of making the viewer wait for the monster to pop out of the shadows. Instead, what you have to do is you have to use a couple of tricks in order to make the reader wait on something. My favorite horror writers are H.P. Lovecraft and Stephen King. Stephen King should be a gimme, but Stephen King emulates H.P. Lovecraft in ways that aren't obvious. So what H.P. Lovecraft will do, besides describing things with very sinuous language, he uses a whole lot of complicated vocabulary to describe the things that are there. Now you can describe things literally. You can say, "Oh well, it looked like the mummy looked like an alligator. It had a snout 18 inches long with two nostrils, and it had deep set eyes." You can describe it very literally. He doesn't do that. He uses stranger terms to slightly obscure the details of what he's trying to describe. So he'll describe. In fact, I was just reading some H.P. Lovecraft earlier when my daughter was sleeping. Always a great time to read H.P. Lovecraft is like the middle of the night when you're holding a baby, right, in a dark room. It's not the best time. Jared says Jaws is his favorite horror film. I think that's a great one too, and it's actually very good at this. It uses all the different elements of craft to kind of hype up what the shark is going to do. In fact, let me read this because I was just reading the story. Here we go. To convey any idea of these monstrosities is impossible. They were of the reptile kind, with body lines suggesting something, sometimes the crocodile, sometimes the seal, but more often nothing of which either the naturalist or the paleontologist ever heard. So rather than saying it's about 6 feet long, something like that, you obfuscate it. You're creating shadows. This is the literary version of shadows, so that the reader has to, in his mind, create a horrific image. And of course, the length of the sentences matters, because in all that time that the reader's taking to read these long sentences with this kind of sinuous language, that's tension time. That's time spent without a resolution. So that's the way that you make the reader wait for the resolution, is you use these longer forms of prose. And for Stephen King, who often says he writes too much for his own good, he says he has diarrhea of the word processor. It actually works great for horror because it prolongs that tension. Let me keep reading. In size, they approximated a small man, and their forelegs bore delicate and evidently flexible feet, curiously like human hands and fingers. But strangest of all were their heads, which presented a contour violating all known biological principles. Again, we don't know. He hides the form. To nothing such things can be well compared. In one flash, I thought of comparisons as varied as the cat, the bullfrog, the mythic satyr, and the human being. So he's giving you a bunch of images and asking your mind to combine them into something horrific. He's not really telling you what it looks like. He's asking you to decide what it looks like. Not Jove himself had so colossal and protuberant a forehead. Yet the horns and the noselessness and the alligator-like jaw placed the things outside all established categories. I debated for a time on the reality of the mummies, half suspecting they were artificial idols, but soon decided they were indeed some Paleogean species which had lived when the nameless city was alive. To crown their grotesqueness, most of them were gorgeously enrobed in the costliest of fabrics, and lavishly laden with ornaments of gold, jewels, and unknown shining metals. So people say, oh, well, that's word painting. It's like, it's actually not as detailed as you would expect, but that's a long paragraph to describe an alligator-like mummy being. He wants to prolong the tension, so that's the way that H.P. Lovecraft does it. Stephen King does it by having lots of thoughts occurring, lots of dialogue, lots of descriptions of things which aren't the image. So like if you're walking down a hall, rather than describing the hall, what you do is you describe the way your boots crunch underfoot. Like maybe you're walking down a hotel and you notice that the carpet is crunchy and has a palpable stiffness to it. The reader starts to feel those things, starts to feel the crunch under their feet. And that, in some cases, they can literally feel it. Like you can literally feel this creepy, like almost psychosomatic expression of your nerves happen. And it gets them thinking about all that, about how creepy that is and about how horrible that feels, rather than wanting you to describe or bothering to want you to describe exactly the ghost that's at the end of the hallway. So when you finally get to the ghost, you've had all these paragraphs and all these sentences to really kind of build up the negative feelings and the fear that's gonna give it this ghost. So adding lots of prose in is actually a really good way. Now, for other genres, I recommend less prose than horror. But horror, more prose tends to make the tension a little bit more effective. And likewise, you tend to do a little bit better without having to stick so rigorously to some sort of predetermined plot outline, where you can really focus on the macro. This is another one of Stephen King's strengths. He's not good at macro plot stuff, in my opinion, and I don't think he plans out his books in advance the way that I would, but he's very good at doing that macro. In some cases, the micro. Some cases, the micro is so good, you go all the way through the book, and only at the end do you realize that there wasn't a really clear or consistent plot and set of plot goals, because he's so good at the micro. A good example of that is The Shining. The Shining really has not much of a plot structure, but it's very effective writing. It's effective because it's effective on the micro level. Let's take a look at some of the chat. Hopefully that makes a lot of sense to you. Let me, I'll look at the chat and then I'll talk about graphic novels and comics, because horror in graphic novels and comics has actually affected movies in a particular way because of the limitation of that medium. Excuse me. Let's see here. So are you team... someone asked, is it the same as science fiction? It's more about the ideas than the plot of the characters. I think so, but you still want event sequences that make sense. You still want characters that are likable. In fact, in horror, it's really important to have likable characters because you don't want them to die. So are you team Jacob or team Edward? I don't know yet because I haven't finished the second book. The clean your room thing is meant to give those with no responsibilities needs a basic form of repeated action payoff. Not invested in it, but shut-ins have a sense of that. I understand that. Combi Chan. That's a very, very good point, and I respect that. The thing is that I think you should focus as much of your energy into things which are effective to the outside world, not just things which create habits. Habits, it's not a bad habit to have your room be cleaned. It's not bad to feel like you have control over something in your life, which includes your room. If you feel like you have control over nothing, you can at least control your room, and that's a positive. But you should go from that and go to the next thing, which is like, can I control my body? Can I write a book? Can I ask this girl out? What can I do? Have you watched at least Alien or The Thing? Absolutely. I love The Thing as well as Alien. Rather than having something jump out of the darkness, I prefer having something just staring back at you, creating a more of an eerie sense of unease. Yeah, that's another feeling that you can get. That's another feeling. It's like something looks at you and you don't know what to do. And this is one that you can do in a book really, really well. You can say the thing just stared back with its empty eyes, not moving. And, main character's name, Jacob. Jacob wasn't sure whether to turn and run. If he were to turn his back on the thing, he could feel its claws digging into his shoulders. And so he began to slowly back away. And then something gets him from behind me. You can do lots of stuff like that. Even though I'm a Carpenter fan, I still haven't watched Halloween. Halloween's good. Yeah. It has one of those classic scores, but I actually think the score in a horror movie is not that important. Certainly a thematic score is less important in horror than it is in other genres. Now, Alien has a great score, but you notice that the themes are very subdued and relaxed. It's not, they're not in your face. It's a very creepy movie, and the score isn't right up in your face, which allows you to have a lot of silent moments. Alien's a great one to look at. Why do some like horror and others can't stand it? I can't handle watching anything with horror. It's too intense. So, great question from Seth. It has to do with how you like to have an emotional high. So people who really like horror like to have the emotional high that comes from being scared or disgusted or all of those negative feelings. So it brings an emotional high. That's why some people like to listen to black metal and other people can't stand it. It's too intense. It's because it has a different kind of emotional high. It doesn't make you necessarily feel good, but the point is that you feel emotions. And in a lot of cases, when you get done with a horror movie, you feel really good, like it's a release thing. World of Geekdom says Star Trek the original series was also quasi horror TV. Totally, there were totally episodes where you had big horror elements like rock monsters that chase people down. I'm a doctor, Jim, not a bricklayer. Let's see here. I always consider Jurassic Park a horror movie. I consider it sci-fi horror, but most people don't because it's high concept. It has this beautiful score. Dinosaurs, but it really is. And Michael Crichton wrote the book a lot like a horror book too. It's great. Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing were one of the best horror duos in film. Absolutely. And they were both in Star Wars movies. How cool is that? Christopher Lee got to be Count Dooku and Peter Cushing was Grand Moff. They were just in Star Wars movies like almost 40 years apart, or 30 some odd years apart. I loved Christopher Lee. Christopher Lee's a guy who would probably be like one of my heroes. He started recording metal albums in his 90s. So when people are like, am I too old to do this? I'm like, Christopher Lee he didn't have big success with his career until he was in his 80s. And he decided he was going to record metal albums in his 90s, and he just did it. So be more like Christopher Lee and less like what you're told, which is that like only young people can be successful in whatever creative endeavor. Or George R. R. Martin. George R. R. Martin, man, he didn't find big success until he was old. And now he's doing great. The original Saw was more of a psychological horror film primarily focused in one place. The sequels embraced the blood and gore. Yeah, that's a great point, Jared. So blood and gore was definitely part of the original Saw, but the sequels focused more on the gore than they did on the tension and the psychology of it. But there's definitely plenty of gore in the first Saw, and they just went with that. Let me talk quickly about graphic novels. So if you're writing a horror graphic novel, of course the ones I'm remembering are like the Predator comics, the Dark Horse Predator comics from the 90s. These were really good. Predator, of course, is really a horror film too, in its own way. Not as, it's like action horror, but you really have to focus on how are you going to slow down the reader's page turn, because the reader can page turn very quickly in a graphic novel, in some cases more quickly than a novel. People will speed up their reading during tense moments in a horror book. But you can do the same thing in a graphic novel. Graphic novels that are horror tend to go more the gory, frightening images route because that's their strength. Their strength is providing you with an image that can be disturbing, unsettling, or gross. So when I think of like classic horror comics, going back from the 60s, they focused on kind of grotesque stuff. I remember these like zombie, like these Silver Age, I'm trying to remember what it's called. I remember the zombie one I read like as a kid that deeply disturbed me. Because it described like this thoughtless zombie like rising from the swamp, and it showed his like grotesque face. You got to shock people with gross, really off-putting images. And one of the ways that you can draw off-putting images, this is not an art channel, but just some tips, is you take a form. I talked about this with Jesse White. You take a form and you obscure something human about it, and you alter something that would be human about it. So you get rid of the eyes, and it becomes horribly frightening. You replace the eyes with like hands, like in Pan's Labyrinth, and it becomes horribly frightening. You make the teeth too long. You make the ears too big. You distort the human form usually in just one way is all you need to do. You make the nose too long, or you chop the nose off, and then it's a horrific image. And that's really what you got to go with the graphic novel, because that's what it does well. It shows the image, and the person can really take in all the detail of the gross image. So the better you are at drawing gross stuff, the better you'll be with the graphic novel. H.P. Lovecraft is able to make me feel almost paranoid when I read his work. Shadow over Innsmouth comes to mind. Yes. I'm trying to remember what story I was just reading from this one. Let's put a bookmark and go back to the contents. You can get like the entire like H.P. Lovecraft library for really cheap. The Nameless City, that's what I was reading. Nameless City. So Nameless City is a really good story. It's one that I really enjoy. Where he's exploring this city, and it's populated by ancient weird reptiles, kind of, but he always, it's like it's part alligator, part seal. Well, those two things don't go together. You just ask the person to combine it in their mind, and they do it, and then it turns into a horrific image. Kaku says, also let's mention Berserk. If any arc that creeped me out was the Lost Children. Yeah, Berserk does a lot of things well. Super chat from Kaku, $5. I do appreciate that. Thank you very much. Do you think certain threats evoke expectations, especially those submerge themselves in horror genre? Aliens, machines, demons, animals, etc. Yes. That's a great one. So, an animal, a bear, right? If you think of a bear, something like if you were reading Stephen King's The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, the demon is a bear. But a bear, anything that is unknowable and beyond your capacity is going to be frightening, or at least in your mind. So a bear is much larger than you. It's much stronger than you. Bear, how are you going to defeat a bear when you don't have a gun, right? The bear is unpredictable because it's an animal. Animals are unpredictable. If you make an alien, the alien is unpredictable. It's unknowable. Anything that removes the sense of humanity from it or the predictability of it works really, really well as a threat. Demons, of course, are, unknowable in their own way. Machines, now what makes machines a cool threat, like computers or AIs or robots, is that you're going to lose control of the machine. The machine is going to turn on its master. That's a very classic theme. The AI is going to become rampant. He's going to close the door on you and kill you. He's not going to let you back in the spaceship. All that stuff represents a threat. And it's because it's unpredictable. How do you predict a machine or a robot? It's not human. It doesn't act like a human, and therefore you don't know what to expect. George R. R. Martin wrote the first word of Outer Limits, which was brilliant. From Geekdom. I didn't know that. You learn something new every day. Let's keep going here. Why don't Lovecraft stories make good movies? Lots of movies are inspired by him, but few are direct adaptations. Why is that? Most of the time, there's probably not enough there to make a movie, or you'd have to change a whole lot. I think a lot of Lovecraft comes down to execution. But I'm not sure. It's the other thing is it's in the public domain, which means if you made a Lovecraft movie, you can't trademark a Lovecraft movie. If you make Call of Cthulhu the movie, it's like anyone can make that. You can make a Call of Cthulhu movie now. In fact, if there's any filmmakers watching, you can make most Lovecraft stuff is in the public domain at this point, so you can just make a Lovecraft movie if you want to. Mouth of Madness. I never saw that one, Max. Maybe I'll have to look it up. Author himself is speechless when trying to render an image or resolution of It. Yeah. I don't think you can adapt the book It. I don't really like the book It. It's actually one of my least favorite Stephen King books for a whole bunch of reasons. It has like pedophile sex in it. It's got some really gross stuff that's not, it grosses me out in the wrong way. Like it's perverted gross. Like the children all have sex with each other at the end of It. In case you didn't know. Spoilers! Spoiler alert, the children have a big lolly orgy at the end of It. That's not the kind of grossness that I want out of horror. It's like I know this sounds weird. It's like I'm okay with you describing intestines because that's part of the experience I signed up for. I didn't sign up for like child porn in the middle of a Stephen King book. So that's something that was really off-putting. But the whole book is just too long. There's some great micro in it, but it's so long you get to the end of it and you're like, nothing happened in this book. Jared says, I wrote a horror script that I initially envisioned as a slasher film, but it became a whodunit type of psychological horror film. I think it turned out better than my initial idea. I like the whodunits better, personally. The tension works better. I feel, they're more effective on me. Pissed at Vox for their insanity from Terrapar. Coping with my anger by watching a sane human. How much of the It would be scary without music critique do you think is valid in horror films? A lot of it. A lot of it, actually. Music changes a lot of the way that you interpret a scene. It can add fear or it can take it away. There's Stanley Kubrick's last film, Eyes Wide Shut, had this thing with the piano where it was just a repeated one note, kind of postmodern thing, and it really worked with the scenes that it was in. It really worked well. It added tension into it because one note. What does one note do? It's neither tense nor a resolution. It just goes on, and it makes you aware of the passage of time. It's just this one note, ding, at about 70 beats per minute, ding, just going over and over again. It's really effective, but I couldn't tell you too much else about the other music, just those moments. Again, which makes me think that horror, especially in movies, is all about the micro. Why is it short stories, this is from Egarog, why is it short stories like Who Goes There, aka The Thing, and Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which is Blade Runner, make great films while novels adaptations are hit or miss? Halloween does have a classic score, by the way, just to go back, because World of Geekdom says classic Halloween score. Yeah, it's really good. It's subdued but good. A lot of them have good ones. Some of them, there's too much. Jaws is actually on the edge of too much music for me, but it's still very effective. And that's, there's nothing wrong with the score from Jaws, but it's not quite as creepy as I could be in the last time I watched it. So some things make good adaptations, other things don't. Why is that? Well, the problem is when you're changing formats, a lot of things happen. If you're going from a graphic novel or a manga to a movie, it's almost like you have a storyboard there. Those things translate really well. You have a visual space. But when you're going with a book, especially something like H.P. Lovecraft, could you conjure a reptilian mummy that's going to be as horrific as what your mind can imagine? You can conjure something pretty horrific, but the idea that it could be as horrific as each person's imagination of that is just not true. So you lose some things in the translation, but also a book tends to contain way more stuff, and you can pack way more information into a book and way more details into a book than you can with a movie. As far as details about world building, plot, character thoughts, all that stuff is more easily packed into novels. with comic books, if you're going to comic adaptation or a manga adaptation, you're kind of in between there. You can show a lot of stuff visually without having to describe it, which saves a lot of space, but you can't do as much thinking. The dialogue, there's a lot of dialogue in comics, but you can't throw a lot of narrative exposition in there. A lot of classic Marvel comics do it and do it really well, but you can only do so much of it. You can do a couple paragraphs at the beginning of an issue, maybe another monologue here and there. But sometimes modern comics, it's just like a page of dialogue with like some, like the character kind of off in the corner by himself. And you got to kind of wonder like why they chose to do all that with a comic rather than editing down the dialogue. It might only be just me, but I actually found several parts of The Shining's final act to be quite humorous. Something about Jack Nicholson's acting. Yeah, you're not the only one that thinks that. I think Jack Nicholson was very effective in the final act. It's way more crazy to me. Just absolutely kind of frightening. But I could see how someone would find it humorous because it's such a character. Another super chat from Delta Wolf. Thank you for the $5. How can you write a good action scene without it sounding confusing or redundant? Very good question. It has to do with how you do the micro. So there's different approaches. Some people... So here's the main thing. Here's the main thing about writing action. I've said this before. The outcome matters more when you're writing a book. Let's be specific here. This is also true in movies, in my opinion. The outcome matters more than how you get there. So you have to be clear about what the outcome of an action is, much more than you need to be clear about how that action was performed. Now, in my books, I'm pretty specific about certain things, and other things maybe I gloss over, but I'm usually pretty specific about things in my books. If you read someone like R.A. Salvatore, I'm not sure how he wants his last name pronounced, but he'll be like, Driz dropped into a set of sweeping strikes at knee level. You just kind of have to imagine what that means. And then he goes, finally hitting his opponent just above the ankle. What matters is that he cut his foot off. Severing his foot, cut his foot off. The outcome is what matters much more than how you get there. So you don't have to get too self-conscious about how you're doing the micro. Try to write a good sentence that gets you to where you need to do, and then make sure that the reader's very clear on what the resolution is. Let me get to this $10 super chat and then I'll read something. Last super chat, Kaku. Hopefully not the last ever. I appreciate the super chats though. I do. How much overlap the horror genre can produce with the others? Compatibility or related? Such as crime, mystery, suspense, snuff, tragedy, supernatural, sci-fi, fantasy, survival. You could put horror into any other genre, and you should use horror techniques in other genres to produce fear. And I think you can cross over, since horror is mostly about the micro, you can cross it with any other genre that you want, as long as you're aware of how you're executing the micro. Are you showing the disturbing images? Are you making the reader wait to have the resolution? And then you can have the sci-fi ideas in there too, or supernatural ideas. Suspense. I mean, suspense and horror go well together, I think. Crime, all that stuff can be interrelated. It's all about, because horror is more about how you execute it. It can mix with anything. You can have sci-fi horror, you can have crime horror, you can have action horror, you can have fantasy horror, all those things. Usually fantasy horror is like dark horror. Anyway, I've read this one before. Let me see if I can give you a different one. So I've read the Duel before, but that's just like a good micro one. Let me see if I can find another good one. Let's do the first chapter of Needle Ash. Second chapter. So I tend to do pretty... Let's see here. That's a good one. Find a good one. I'm just I don't remember exactly where every little description is in my book, so it takes me some time to scan through it. Let's see here. Let's see here. Yes. He didn't turn to see if the light cavalry obeyed him, but he knew they would. He turned his attention to the men under Callot's hooves, banging against the horse's armor. Could also call it barding, which is the proper term. He thrust his lance downward, once, twice. On the third stab, he caught a man, and Callot's massive bulk and forward momentum made him drop the lance, lest he test the oak shaft against his arm. He drew his longsword and began hacking downward. The knights on either side of him were doing the same, most of their lances broken on the enemy. A quick glance to his left let him know the tactic had succeeded, so I'm giving you the outcomes. The Fairlie's infantry was in a panic, and the rear lines were no longer trying to prevent a rout from the front. Michael looked across the river to the dragoons, who were already remounting to head upriver, preventing escape across the water and moving to harass any attempt to reform after the rout. So, what I describe here is, in some cases, broad strokes, and in some cases, specific. He once, twice, thrice. So we kind of focus on the action, but it's mainly on the third stab, he caught a man, and Callot's massive bulk and forward momentum made him drop the lance, lest he test the oak shaft against his arm. I didn't say where it went in his neck. He killed a guy. He stabbed a guy with the lance, and then his horse was moving forward, and he had to drop the lance, or it would have broken his arm. And so that's the way I executed that particular little action scene. So that's all stuff that you can do with good execution. But it's always more about the outcome than that. Geekdom, 1996 Outer Limits, not the old one. Thank you. I figured that one. I liked that one. I remember this one with Henry Rollins in it, where he was like taking in all the bad emotions of his patients. He was like a doctor. It was so interesting. Wasn't Tolkien older than the norm when he wrote The Hobbit? Yeah, he was in his 40s. I don't remember how old he was. I don't know if he was older than the norm or not. Have you read The King in Yellow? I haven't. I have a leather-bound copy of H.P. Lovecraft's life work. Cool. You can get the ebook for like 25 cents, guys, and it's worth it. You can get all of Lovecraft's stuff for free. You should at least read a couple of stories like Nameless City, Call of Cthulhu, something like that. But was the god of the lost in The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon a bear, or was he indeed a god? He was a bear. He was a bear, but she was perceiving him as something. That's what that was about. Film Girl says, I hope you're well. When writing a tension scene, do you think it's better to focus on the inner thoughts of the character in that scene, or just describe everything around them? For horror, I like the inner thoughts. Because then, the inner thoughts become the reader's thoughts. And since your focus is film, sometimes a tight shot of the actor, sorry, I'm eating a cough drop because my throat hurts so bad, but sometimes a tight shot of the actor emoting or holding one kind of tense look can actually communicate a lot about what's going on in their head without you having to do any kind of, voiceover or something like that. Your thoughts on The Exorcist? I liked the original one. I haven't seen it in years, though. How much detail would I need? If you were doing a novel, as much as you want to prolong the resolution of the tension. So a paragraph worth. Usually if you do one paragraph and people see that paragraph break, they have the option of skipping it. Readers do their own thing. So if you give them a paragraph break, sometimes they'll take the option of skipping it. I never do. I read all the hoop-de-doodle. What's your opinion on the SCP Foundation tales? Don't know what that is. Delta Wolf says, I think Stephen King's kind of overrated. Depends. He's overrated and he's severely underrated as well. Lucas says the child orgy was totally unnecessary. I agree. I wasn't referring to that it, just simple it. Thank you, Kaku. I appreciate the super chat. A lot of Conan Doyle's Holmes stuff had horror overtones, really gripping. Yeah, there's a lot of tension in it. And I think that helps. And a lot of fear of death, or just like kind of grotesque stuff sometimes. Guillermo del Toro attempt to get his adaptation of At the Mountains of Madness made with Tom Cruise. That would be interesting. What would you say that tension-filled scenes require more effort to pull off than those filled with shocking events and gore? I would say, if you are technically good and you have a great understanding of the craft, they're probably easier because it doesn't require you to make practical effects. Right? The point is you can make fear without having to show gore. But you have to be good at what you're doing. It's kind of like, what's easier to play, slow music or fast music? People who are beginners at guitar think fast music is harder to play than slow music. But as you get better, you realize that the slow music is much more difficult because it requires a greater degree of control. The micro is more important, how you do vibrato. If you're just playing a fast piece, you don't even have to know how to do vibrato. You can just play through the notes. You just play the notes and the piece comes out. And whereas if you're playing something soft and slow, there's a huge amount of subtlety you have to put into the work. So you have to have a higher skill level to play slow music than fast music. I know that sounds weird, but if you're an experienced musician, you'll know that's the case. Or a singer having to sustain one note clearly and with control over the vibrato. Sustaining one note for a long time can be very difficult if you're not well trained as a singer. Jared says, I think the film version of Jaws is better than the book. I never read the book. Spielberg removed many things from the book that weren't that necessary to the book, such as Hooper sleeping with Mrs. Brody. Yeah, that's not necessary to the outcomes. So you got to stick. This is when you make an adaptation. Usually, there's a bunch of stuff that's extra in the book, and you got to decide what actually matters. It might have mattered to the characters in the book, but it won't matter. It might inhibit the actual screenplay. Yeah. Jared says Spielberg made the characters more likable than the book did. Yeah. Can anyone name their favorite video game in the horror genre? Me is Resident Evil. The Resident Evil 2 is the one I really remember from PlayStation. I was getting confused. I'm like, was it Resident Evil 1 or 2? Resident Evil 2 is the one I really remember. Silent Hill 2 I also really remember. Those are the ones that I think had a big impact. Something about the low resolution graphics kind of helped that. Terrapar says, I can't help but hate horror films because of how they make me feel. When a strange call stresses me out due to the constant thumping in the soundtrack. Happy to be there. Yeah. Horror's not for everyone, but I want to try to give some insight into how you actually execute it. Hey, David, I'm a mobile app developer, and I have an app that allows creators to accept super chats, and it pays out more than YouTube does. Any interest in using it? It depends. It depends. You can email me about it. I don't know. I like things to be easy for people. The problem is not that I don't get enough money from super chats or that it's getting people to do things easy. I'm like revealing my business. The easier it is for somebody to tip you, to commit money, to commit their attention. More importantly, really most importantly is the attention. The easier it is to do that, the better. This is why, I got rid of my Patreon because I didn't support their practices. But it was a big educational experience, which is you should judge people by what they do, not what they say they're going to do. So nobody jumped over to Subscribestar. It just didn't happen. Inertia is a thing. Subscribestar would have required you to sign up for another website to do another thing like that's just the same as Patreon. People just weren't going to do it. They just bowed out. So anything the problem with trying to replace YouTube super chats when it's not necessary is just that people won't use the other version. They might use it, they might not. But getting them to use it, there's an inertia there. People don't like to jump ship unless they have a compelling reason to. But then once they start jumping ship, everybody leaves. So when YouTube dies, and this is the thing about my business now. So if lots of people jump off of YouTube now and go see their creators on BitChute, whatever it is, that makes the money I make from YouTube less. I don't feel bad about that. But once YouTube really starts to die and that people are on some other platform, it's going to die quick. It's going to be like MySpace. So once the inertia takes over, it just snowballs and people tend to just abandon ship and do the next cool thing. But until that time, inertia is really powerful. Just having another alternative is not enough. Ever seen the play movie Rent? I watched a video of Rent a while back, I think. I did not like it. You weren't impressed either. Felt the wolf. So I didn't like it. I thought it was nihilistic and just bad. And I didn't like the messaging of it. Film Girl says, thank you for answering my question. You are welcome. Recommendation. Ayakashi Samurai Horror Tales. The Bakaneko. And its anime spin-off of Mononoke. Okay, those are good recommendations. This manga that I really loved called Shigerubi, which means Death Frenzy. You can watch the anime. Anime is incomplete, but the anime is really good. It does this tension thing really well in the anime. And the manga is great too. It's a great manga. But the anime does, there's a duel where the swordsmen are just staring at each other for like a minute. And there's internal dialogue and just the tensions going up. And then finally one person moves and they each have a separate strategy, and then the sword fight's over very quickly. So you have all this tension come up and then a quick release where there's just a quick exchange, and then you have the outcome of the duel, just like that. It's great. So if you can find Death Frenzy, you're probably in English it's Death Frenzy. I always prefer subs over dubs, but it's up to you. The dub is not bad. So I've watched the dub too. The dub's very good as well. It's not like a bad English. Most English dubs these days are pretty good. I do recommend that one for if you want something that's kind of like samurai stuff. Of course, you can read, Muramasa, which definitely has significant horror elements in it. It's called Muramasa Blood Drinker for a reason. It's samurai horror, historical fiction. A lot of horror elements in that, as well as, action and romance and stuff like that. So it's got it all, but I use the horror elements like I'm talking about now. It's all about controlling that tension. $10 from Delta Wolf. Thank you. On the subject of Rent, I think it's an example of how not to write characters. The characters are narcissistic and blame all their problems on others instead of their reckless actions. Yeah. I'm trying to remember, they had they were HI positive or something. It just went on and on. I didn't like the music. I don't really like musicals. I'm trying to think who I watched this with. I want to say I watched it with the girlfriend of a friend. She wanted us to watch it, and we watched it, and I don't think I got through it, actually. I don't remember. It's been so long. It's been at least 10 years that I didn't like it. Has it been 10 years? I don't know. It's been a while. But I really didn't like the characters. I agree with that. It wasn't just that they were narcissistic. It was like, they were completely without virtue. Like, they weren't relatable and likable on any level to me. Like, they were kind of contemptible. So when you have characters that are meant to evoke pathos and be kind of pathetic, it's very easy for them to have contempt. This is my criticism of The Great Gatsby. The characters in The Great Gatsby, the character of Jay Gatsby, he's a pathetic character. And if you respond well to pathos, that's fine. But I tend to have contempt for characters that are like him. I found him to be too pathetic a character. And most of the characters, the narrator, I didn't like either. I thought he was a bit pathetic too. Let's see here. Sorry for the stuffy nose. I'm coming down with something. A lot of times when I try to write horror, this is from Nitaku, it turns out to be more paranormal, mystery, or adventure. I often get lost in world building and overdue description. The overdone description may actually help depending on what you are putting off. If you're putting off a resolution, if you put that description in the right place and execute it correctly, like Lovecraft, it's not too much description. And it's not too much description if your setting is extremely interesting and you want the reader to like that. It can be paranormal mystery with horror elements. It doesn't have to be straight up horror. My new book, which here's what the cover looks like right now. I'll probably do a couple tweaks before I put it out. It's called Voices of the Void. It's very Lovecraftian. It's very dark, and there's plenty of gore. And I describe gore in some cool ways. So if you like the gore in Muramasa, then you'll definitely like the gore in this. I don't know why I felt like I had to do full-blown horror right after my daughter was born. But whatever reason, this was what came in my head after I had a very strange dream. and I just went with it. I said I'm gonna write this story. It's I'll talk a little bit more about it at the end, but that's what the cover looks like. This idea of a book cover is just here to evoke the emotion of horror. So we have a man screaming. These are actually jellyfish tentacles that are all over him. I put in those jellyfish tentacles, and this weird, almost yarn-looking effect. Those are also jellyfish tentacles. So most of this cover is this planet I created in Photoshop with the all of this stuff, and then this jellyfish tentacles and a guy screaming, and then some special color grading. Purple, orange, and red tend to communicate horror genres pretty well. The purple is kind of a sci-fi thing, and so that will tell you that you see a planet, sci-fi, guy screaming with tentacles, sci-fi horror. And that's what you're going to get with that particular one. Let's see here. It's mostly horror. It's horror in a sci-fi setting, kind of like Aliens, right? Rather than it's a sci-fi setting with horror elements. It's horror pretty much beginning to end. Let's see here. Any examples of bad horror novels? I don't know. So this is a thing. Like, I tend to forget bad stuff. You know, I like Clive Barker novels. I've read some bad Clive Barker novels, but I couldn't tell you which ones because I tend to forget them. I figured out, like, after reading a bunch of Clive Barker books, I don't really like Clive Barker's writing. But I think I like his movies. Like Hellraiser, I think, was Clive Barker. Are good, effective horror movies easier or harder to make than similar quality horror video games? Good question. I don't know. Making a video game is very hard. So being able to put all the mood that creates a horror movie, so here's the thing about games. Games, it's out of your control. There's good horror video games like, I think, what's it called? Amnesia? Amnesia Dark Descent. With a video game, you can't control the dissipation of tension. It's up to you to try to get the player to create the tension. So if you make the gameplay have an incentive towards walking slowly, then that ups the tension. Whereas if you incentivize them to run through everything like a maniac, there won't be any tension. Let's use a game that probably more people play. Let's use Elder Scrolls. You could do Elder Scrolls 5 or 4. They're both good. But if you play a sneaky character that's maybe kind of squishy, you end up sneaking through like these dark caves, kind of waiting for something to happen. Like the first time you play, you go down, you get sent on this mission to go get this dragon claw out of this barrow. And so you go down and the zombies start rising out of the graves, which it's the first time you see it. It really should have been like the way that they introduced the game rather than the ridiculous like dragon comes down and stops your head from being chopped off. Which I didn't like that much. But anyway, if you're creeping slowly, that's tension. So you have an incentive to creep slowly, which is you don't want to get detected. You want to get a jump on the bad guy, but the bad guy detects you and yells, and then all of a sudden you're like, where is he? And you look down at your radar and it's like, where is he? And he pops out. I remember a shooter game called Marathon from the 90s for like Bungie Software. It was a Bungie Software game way before Halo. And you had this motion detector like from Aliens. So you'd see the aliens moving around you, but you're like, where are they? And so that created an interesting bit of tension. I used to not be able to play that at night because the sounds of the aliens plus not seeing them would be so scary. Let's see here. So I don't know which one's harder to make. Oh, Lobster 11, Money Talks. Let's see here. Death Frenzy is freaking awesome. It is. The drawing style is crazy detailed and almost grotesque. I love it. It's very Baroque. Baroque is the word that I like to use. Like Cyber Frog is Baroque. And that dude with one arm, Duel, is awesome. The whole thing's awesome. And there's some great like grossness to it. When he like cuts through the guy's eyes, there's like the burning of the breast. Like, oh, it's great. Yeah, Mononoke's good too. Rent was the musical about everyone has AIDS. Yeah, that's it. I think Rent is an adaptation of yeah, it's supposed to be like La Boheme, but why not just watch La Boheme? La Boheme's good. Do you remember if you read The Hellbound Heart, which is the book that he adapted into Hellraiser? I've seen the movie, but I haven't read the book. I don't think I did, actually, Jared. I don't think I read it. Maybe I should. I feel CG, this is from George, I feel CG hasn't done gory horror very well. I've been thinking of the old stuff like The Thing and the artistry and the makeup and fake blood. Yeah, so there's a chaos element to blood splatter. So if you do it with a computer, it's never going to be quite as real feeling as what they used to do, which is they'd actually take a condom, they'd put fake blood in a condom and put it over like a thing that would explode, and then so blow up the condom, and so the blood would really spray out in an uncontrolled fashion. So that made for some really interesting and very visceral blood splatter. It's real, it's physical. The thing's actually exploding out of you. I like the old practical effects for that. Although in some cases, like here's the thing. With Alien, the practical effect of the alien is actually not that good. You see it in full view at the end and it's grotesque, but it's not that frightening. Because it's basically a dude in a rubber suit, right? But up until that time, you never see the whole alien. You just see images of it. And so your mind paints in a fully realistic alien. And so the practical effects are more effective because you see less of them, not because you see more of them. If you're going to see something in high detail, CG is probably a better choice because you can have more detail. Some practical effects look really bad. You know, I've seen a bunch of practical effects that look bad from classic movies. You know, where like I think in Terminator they had Arnold Schwarzenegger had this fake wax face and it just looked awful. One thing I found about H.P. Lovecraft is that his descriptions of places have a strange beauty to them. They do. That's part of the greatness of his execution. Have you heard or played the horror game Until Dawn? I haven't heard of that. So I don't know about that. Delta Wolf says he hated Great Gatsby. Now, I might do some actual content on why Great Gatsby sucks. But let me give you the short version. It's not a well-constructed novel in the macro level, and the characters are contemptible. That's why I don't like it. There's no plot. It just wanders from scene to scene. And if you read much about it, you figure out that Fitzgerald had no idea how to finish the book or what he was doing. And he got behind writing a 50,000-word book, which you should never get behind on. Shouldn't do that. All the characters are reflections of his like gamma male status, of basically low on the social hierarchy, and his bitter spitefulness about that. So the female characters are like shallow bimbos, which reflects his view of women being negative. I think he's rather sexist with his portrayal of women. You have Tom. I think it's Tom. Is it Tom? Anyway, the guy is cheating on his wife. He like punches his girlfriend. He makes Gatsby like drive his wife home, which is bizarre at the end of the book. Tom Buchanan, yeah. And so he's a caricature of like an alpha male, masculine alpha male. And so because Fitzgerald is basically Rover or Omega, because he's like low man on the totem pole, he views anyone above him as negative, so he creates the most negative thing he can about Tom Buchanan. Tom Buchanan is rich without explanation, but he cheats on his wife, he punches women, he's generally no good, he's a bad guy. And that's just reflects his view of other men. Whereas Jay Gatsby is really a reflection of him. It's like an author insert. He's passive, he's meek, he fawns over women for years in a very pathetic and really contemptible manner. At the same time, he's a bootlegger and does not act like a bootlegger. Bootleggers have people killed. So Gatsby is not his character, and what he does don't line up at all. He's a passive, pathetic character that would not exist very long in the profession of bootlegger. He's not hard enough. Tom Buchanan would be the real bootlegger because he's hard. But he wanted Gatsby to be, while he inserts himself in as Gatsby, he also wants Gatsby to be somehow a reflection of what he wishes his own masculinity to be. So he makes him a bootlegger, a hard bootlegger, but he's not hard. You never see him actually kill anybody or do anything bad. And then the narrator is also just kind of a passive, complaining male. It's really a very boring book for how long it is. It's only 50,000 words, but it's a hard 50,000 words to get through because so little happens and there's so little to like about any of the characters. I think it's one of the most overrated books of all time. All right, let's move on. I've got an idea for a horror version of Last Blood. John was really a queer pansexual all along. Final scene is between milkshake curling Rambo and a gang of alt-right homophobes. It's funny because everyone on the internet is saying this is going to be like this awful racist movie because he's fighting drug gangs. It's like, well, Mexican drug cartels are primarily made up of Mexicans, so if you're going to fight Mexican drug cartels, yes, the actors he will be killing will be racially mestizo. They'll be Mexicans, right? Now he was killing a bunch of Asians in the last one. Doesn't mean that it's racist. It's just the bad guys happen to be Asian. The good guys were Asian too. Fun fact about Terminator: Arnold once walked into a dinner for lunch, forgetting he still had the robot eye makeup on. That's awesome. What's a choice-based game? Until Dawn, Film Girl. Until Dawn, it's a choice-based game. Like every other choice impacts the outcome of the game. It's styled like a typical horror film, but it's interesting. Did you watch the Great Gatsby film? No, I actually didn't. There was one with Leonardo DiCaprio. I can't imagine they could make a good film adaptation out of it. There's no story. Like, nothing happens. Some characters stand around and talk for a while, and then it just ends. Like, dude runs over Gatsby because he's been tricked into thinking Gatsby's cheating with his wife when it's really Tom Buchanan. That's the great twist. It makes sense that Fitzgerald didn't know how to end the book. Fitzgerald was a closeted incel. He was a closeted, incel's not... Incel, he was married. But, like, his original girlfriend was rich, and the dad didn't like him, and it's obvious why the dad didn't like him. He wasn't man enough. Horror comedy, tension used to evoke oh my god or lol. Yes, Kaku. So I'm going to give you an example. It's a little British movie called Hot Fuzz. And it's quite funny, but it's full of some really grotesque humor and some great horror moments. It is a horror it's a comedy, horror comedy. I don't know what to call it. However you mix those two. It starts off as this reluctant buddy cop movie, but turns into this conspiratorial horror movie where people are getting murdered in the town, and this cop from London who's been reassigned to the country has to figure it out. And there's this scene where this piece of the church, this like little spire, decorative spire, falls off the roof and smashes a guy's head in, and the blood goes everywhere. And the guy was like going to tell him who was behind it. And he's just like staggering around with this piece of stone sticking out of his neck. And it's such a horrific image, but the result is you just fall out of your seat laughing. It's so funny. There's tension around it, but the resolution of the tension is just laughter. And then you get to the end of the movie, and there's a cult. It's like a cult of people dedicated to making sure that they have the best town by killing and getting rid of anybody that would disturb the greatness of their town. It's really, really it's a really, really, really funny and effectively grotesque movie. One of the funniest ones I've seen that used horror elements. You know something's bad when the maker has to put the word great in the name just to convince people it's good. True. Another horror comedy would be Scream. Scream has a lot of comedy elements in a horror movie. I pretty much hated TGG because of public school. Oh, The Great Gatsby. Made us read it and To Kill a Mockingbird. I just enjoyed Gatsby finally dying. Now, as a teenager, I didn't understand all these things. I couldn't read the book and understand that F. Scott Fitzgerald, that I just knew that it was boring and I didn't like the characters. I didn't know why. So, and I've never heard of an English teacher even thinking this way. Maybe because they're all women or something and they don't think like men. You know, a man has a certain reaction to these kind of male characters, which is he understands that like Gatsby is he's just like a sniveling, he's like the comic book guy from The Simpsons. He's kind of a pathetic character. You just don't like him, right? And so maybe English teachers don't have this, or they just are doing the lessons out of the book. I don't know, but I've never had English teachers actually lead kids towards proper analysis. I mean, could you imagine if I were an English teacher having this conversation with my kids, dude, I would get fired, or like the parents would be calling all kinds of angry. How come your teacher was talking about alpha, beta, gamma males in class? And, it's like, well, this book that's what it's about. It's not a good book. I don't know why people like it. I really don't. To Kill a Mockingbird, I understand. To Kill a Mockingbird is actually very well executed from like a plot, character perspective. I feel like it's a little, I mean, it paints a picture of the South that's not realistic to me, but you have to paint it that way to make the points that the book's trying to make. But it's really well executed. The Great Gatsby, however, is not. It's especially on the plot level and the characters. Like, you like the characters from To Kill a Mockingbird. You don't like the characters from Great Gatsby. That's how I ended up thinking about it. I'll probably do some other video that's just like, Great Gatsby sucked. Leave your hateful comments down below. And people try to defend Great Gatsby. Oh, it so captures the 20s. This is the other thing about it. It so captures the 20s. Like, no, it doesn't. It captures how rich people lived in the 20s, which is how F. Scott Fitzgerald wanted to live. He wanted to marry the rich girl and be rich. And he didn't get to, all right? No, regular people didn't live like that. The Roaring 20s were not roaring for most people. The 20s were normal for most people. Only rich people lived like that. But people come up with these ideas because you only see, it's like in the past, everyone was a knight. It's like, no. Most people were not knights. They sat around and watched their crops grow, and they didn't even work that hard. Remy D, just curious. I notice everyone is adding you. Are those comments? Yes, I respond to. If you at me, I will respond to the comment. Otherwise, I'll assume you're responding to somebody else. Sorry, I should make that clear at the beginning of every stream. I'm sorry. So if I missed some of your comments or didn't respond, I apologize. Did you know that O.J. Simpson was considered for the Terminator before Arnold, but was turned down because they thought he wasn't intimidating enough? I didn't know that. Gatsby movie in a nutshell. Sepia tone reaction GIFs for Instagram. That's all, folks. I think that glass. Oh, sorry, I missed the super chat. Delta Wolf, no joke, I fell asleep reading The Great Gatsby. I never fell asleep. I think all my friends got like the Cliff's Notes and just like filled in the Cliff's Notes. I actually read it, but man, I just didn't enjoy it. I've read it now. I read it again in my 20s and I liked it more. And then I think I read it a third time and I was like, this is garbage. I was like, I like this more now, I guess. I think I'm one of the only British people who hasn't seen Hot Fuzz. Well, you gotta see it now. You gotta go watch it. I think it's probably on some streaming service. Hardwick Bintho, what type of music do you like other than metal and classical? I listen to ambient stuff when I'm working. I don't know. Obviously, I like progressive rock. That kind of falls in the metal category. Jazz. I listen to a lot of jazz, actually. I still listen to quite a bit of jazz and blues. That's probably it, though. I mean, those are huge genres. I don't really like rap or country or pop, which is like most of the stuff that's on now. The Great Gatsby film was okay. I didn't understand it, but it was okay, I guess. There was nothing to understand. There's no story there. What about Ernest Hemingway? He tends to be hit and miss with me. I agree. So, Delta Wolf. Ernest Hemingway has written some great books, like For Whom the Bell Tolls. and some terrible books like Old Man in the Sea. Old Man in the Sea is actually not that bad. It's just the most boring 33,000 words you're going to read. It's like, it's very short, but it's just like a guy fishing. And so if you're not finding some sort of compelling tension within the way he tells this guy fishing, it's a terrible book. Some people really like it. I think they assign it to kids because it's literally the shortest book, but I think it's probably Hemingway's worst. Like the ghost subplot. Yeah. Let's keep going here. I did see the 1974 film of Great Gatsby. That was entertaining to watch because it was so terrible. The acting was freaking dull and terrible. Yeah, I haven't seen it in 20-some-odd years. I think we watched it in English class because we were, like English class in public school. It's like, we're out of stuff to do. I guess we'll watch the movie of the book we read. And the kids are like, finally, we can just watch the movie to get this stupid story instead of reading. It's like, we hate reading. English is awful. Imagine if kids had sat around and read things they really liked, I'm surprised whenever I see 1984 on like reading lists because I'm like, it's too good. It's too good to be on reading lists. James Cameron didn't think nobody would believe that O.J. Simpson could be a killer. What if a Terminator used O.J. Simpson as the antagonist, or used a Terminator who can easily disguise himself as other humans? They did that. Terminator 2 T-1000 can be anyone. David Stewart is a secret K-pop fan. I think Gangnam Style is like the only K-pop I've heard. Maybe I would be. I don't know. What are your thoughts on Moby Dick? Read the abridged version is my thoughts. Very rarely do I say that, but one of the things about Moby Dick, the time it was written, there's a lot of filler in the book. A lot of filler. There's whole chapters that you can skip. You could look up guides online to know which parts of Moby Dick you can skip, and I might use one of those. And then if you want more, you can go back and always read those parts and determine if they were worth skipping. But it's a book that feels very long because of some of the filler. There's like whole chapters on like how they're tying knots and stuff. It can really drag. But there's some great stuff in it too. There's something I don't like about the self-aware comedy they put in movies lately, like Star Wars or The Avengers. I can't quite put my finger on it, but maybe I'm just burnt out. I think, honestly, the self-aware comedy, it's because once a genre becomes like the superhero genre, once this becomes kind of just ingrained culturally, it becomes another point of reference for humor. So a lot of the Avengers humor is just humor based on assumptions that people have about Avengers movies and things like that, superhero movies. You can make fun of, they make fun of themselves and don't take themselves too seriously. It's one of the things I actually like about Marvel movies. They don't take themselves too seriously. But yet you see this in the Star Wars sequels, where like you're crank calling the general during the attack, like at the beginning of The Last Jedi. That feels so out of place. It's just crammed in there. That's why it feels bad. And there's some places in the Avengers movies where they just cram that stuff in there, and it's just added because they feel like they need some kind of comic relief, and it doesn't really serve any other purpose. Whereas the humor in the prequels and the original trilogy, it really just kind of happens in the moments that are there. A Wookiee doesn't rip your arms out of their sockets when he what is it? He doesn't rip your arms out of your sockets when he loses. That's a good little joke. It's based on the moment. It cues with the characters. It feels good. You wouldn't just cram that somewhere out of place. You wouldn't have a crank call, which is something very 20th century. Delta Wolf liked Old Man in the Sea. You can like it. I didn't like it. Jacob Hibbins, first live stream I managed to catch. Love your work, dude. Thank you. I appreciate that. New book coming out. It's called Voices of the Void. It is sci-fi horror. Let me give you a little bit of a rundown. So main character's name is Andrew. He's insane. So he has multiple personality disorders, but the multiple personalities that are competing within his head happen to give him superpowers. So he has one which basically lives in the future and will allow him to see relevant things in the future when it asserts control. One which can see things in the past, and one which is basically completely evil that he has to constantly suppress. And one of the things about this is he's not sure if he has full control over this other Andrew that he calls Andy. He arrives at this colony that appears to be abandoned, and he's been hired to find someone at the colony. They haven't heard anything from him in quite some time. So it's kind of like the setup from, say, Aliens. Right? Like, oh, we haven't heard from the colonists in a while. It's actually not just from Aliens. That gets a sci-fi trope, but that's the setup. As he proceeds deeper into this mine, things get weirder and weirder. And that's the setup that I'm going to give you for this particular one. It's a 2.5 hour read, maybe, depending on how fast you read, 2 to 2.5 hours. So like the previous mini book, Crown of Sight, which I came out with in March. This one will be a very quick and easy and fun read. If you're on the mailing list, dbspress.com/list, you will get this book for free. I'm giving it away to everyone, mostly because I don't really write much in the horror genre, so I don't know whether people will actually like this or not. Like, people may hate this book, and so I don't want people to buy the book and feel like they wasted 99 cents. And if they did it, then you can pay me back the 99 cents by leaving a review. So I appreciate it. Let's see here. Sorry. Could you recommend some Spanish guitar music? I tried looking, but I didn't find much. If you mean guitar music to play, there's a whole bunch. If you mean guitar music to listen to, start with Andres Segovia. He's the classic one. And then, of course, I like David Russell a lot, so you can just watch David Russell on YouTube. He's great. Pepe Romero, Angel Romero, any of the Romero's Guitar Quartet. They're good to listen to. I like Elliot Fisk's playing a lot. He's a very passionate player. Other people hate him. I think he's great. Kaku says, ever listen to YouTube creepypasta videos? No. Nope, I haven't. And I think my friend wanted me to watch one, and I watched him, and I didn't find him creepy. Film Girl says she'll watch Hot Fuzz. Good. What are your thoughts on Siddhartha? I don't think I have thoughts, because I'm not sure what you mean. If O.J. Simpson happened to actually be in a Terminator film, I would expect his character to say the juice is loose at some point in the movie. Juice is loose was a joke when he got acquitted. We were like, the juice is loose. Which one is the best? 1984, Brave New World, or Fahrenheit 451? I like 1984 the best. Brave New World second, Fahrenheit 451 third. Brave New World, 1984 is the best executed story and has, like, to me, the most profound ideas. Brave New World is also very good, but just not as good. And Fahrenheit 451 has great ideas, but it's just not as well executed. And it's not that it's bad at all. It's still a great book, and I recommend it. But, it's a classic. It's good. What are your thoughts on the classics like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein or Bram Stoker's Dracula? I like both of those. Frankenstein's a little hard to get through these days just because of the romantic writing style, but I don't mind romantic writing style. I like Ivanhoe, I like Sir Walter Scott stuff, so it's okay. I mean, everyone should give them a shot. You can read them for free, so give it a shot, and if you can't get through it, oh well. Not a big deal. No, clearly DVS likes Baby Metal and Lady I know who Baby Metal is. I don't really like Baby Metal, but it's okay. I don't know about Lady Baby. Real Japanese metal is like Anthem. Anthem's a great Japanese metal band. I recommend them. Who are your favorite comic book manga authors? I don't know. David Stewart. The self-aware comedy breaks the immersion too much for my taste. I missed something there. This is message retracted. Okay. Neat title. Droid doesn't rip your arms out of their Droid doesn't rip your arms out of the sockets when they lose. Wookiees are known to do that. Yeah, it's a great joke. It's a great joke. It just really captures the moment. Are you familiar with Sir Roger Scruton? He's an English philosopher who posits that the decline of beauty in art and architecture sped into the decline of Western civilization. I am not familiar with him. I think that it all goes together, though, right? Because The reason that you have a decline of beauty in art is because of the way that aesthetic systems are approached. And I've talked about this before, but the modern idea is we're going to make new aesthetics. We're going to create new aesthetics. That's modernism. And those new aesthetics will be, that man can design aesthetics. So part of that philosophy is that aesthetics are not something supernatural, or they're not something natural even. So in other words, beauty is not something which arises naturally from our environment, from our spiritual nature, from our godlike image, which is the classical view, or I shouldn't say classical. It is the classical view if you go into antiquity, but it's the more romantic view for sure. So as a reaction to the modern, it's like we're going to create new aesthetics. So you have things like 12-tone music, which most people hate 12-tone music. They really don't like it. And there's reasons it's very ugly, because it adheres to an aesthetic that is completely artificial, an aesthetic which has nothing to do with the way that sound actually works or the way that your brain understands relationships of sound. 12-tone music looks at 12 notes on the keyboard and pretends that that's a system. But the 12 notes on the keyboard barely approximate a natural system. I've talked about this in my music theory videos. Real music theory arises naturally from the way that sound interacts, the natural mathematical relationships between them. Notes that are distantly related are dissonant. Notes that are closely related are consonant. The thing is, all the pitches for the 12 notes on a keyboard are put in what's called equal temper tuning, which means that they're equally spaced, and they're actually not equally spaced, because the way octaves work is you double frequencies, but they're spaced so that each note is a certain distance away from the next one, rather than being the function of multiples of frequencies, which would produce different. If you tuned a keyboard in a just intonation C, if you played an F sharp major, it would sound terrible, because all the intervals would be wrong for F sharp. So we adjusted to 12 tones, and guys like Schoenberg said, well, we're just going to make a new system out of that. And I like Schoenberg's music a little bit. I like Webern's music, but it's pretty ugly to most people. And it's an aesthetic that's completely artificial. So from this beginning, this idea that you can create artificial aesthetics, what's the next step? Postmodernism is that aesthetics are not just relative, they're subjective, and therefore they only have whatever meaning you impress upon them. And they're interchangeable. They don't carry specific meaning. And you can see this carried through with churches. Old churches, the aesthetics are intended to have meaning. Newer churches are like stripped down and kind of bland, because there's no belief that there's a connection between aesthetics and meaning, or the connection between aesthetics and meaning has been destroyed in their society, and it's the people who are performing worship music aren't even thinking of the things that I'm talking about. So I do think they go together, but it has to do with everything. Relativism, anti-cultural thought. We've lost a lot of our cultural heritage. Even when people come from other cultures that are very kind of unified and move to, say, the United States, they start to become Americanized. And it's not that they, cling to some American culture. It just, they become part of popular culture. It's kind of interesting to think about. Anyway, that's my rant. The humor of the sequel trilogy is really bad. I agree. What do you think of Monte Cristo? Slow at times, but I liked it. I like it as well. I like the messages in Count of Monte Cristo. I'm amazed how so many movies are greenlit with bad script and bad writing and plot holes galore. How are these writers still able to get script gigs in the industry? So I'm always amazed that bad writing makes it in, because writing is literally the cheapest part of production. If you have a great script writer, it costs you like $100,000 for a script. That's a lot of money, but in a $200 million film, it ain't nothing. The reason that I think you get so much bad stuff is actually because of the amount of revisions that happen. Not that there's too few, there's too many. What happens is the script gets revised 17, 20, 30, who knows how many times it's rewritten. I think Snow White and the Huntsman was rewritten, it was either 17 or 30 times. There's another movie that was rewritten like 30 times. That the movie came out bad at the other end because you lose the vision. The vision of the writer gets gone. And you start having committees. Each time you hire someone to rewrite it, the executive wants you to hedge a bet. They want something else in the script to make sure people like it, to make sure people don't reject it, to make sure it's going to be good. And by the end, you end up with this completely bland and horrible thing. So I actually think it's too many revisions and too many writers. And in a lot of cases, the movie's written as the movie is being filmed. And I think that was the case with episode 7. I think J.J. Abrams had said some things to that effect, that they originally planned to have Luke be something completely different. You can see it in the first scenes in the movie, where they're going to go find Luke, and then they just abandon that and decide that they have to blow up this new Death Star. So it is amazing to me, but I think it has to do with like some risk aversion. Plus, just you could have a bunch of talented people rewrite the same thing 20 times, and it could come out terrible. It's like having 20 artists try to paint the same painting while they're all standing next to each other. It's going to be awful. Signed up for your mailing list last week. Thanks. Jared says your new book sounds really good and the main character sounds interesting. I think it's fun. I had a lot of, it gave me nightmares to write it, so that's cool. If it doesn't give you nightmares, that's good too, I guess. Do you think bass guitar is underrated? I'm writing a character who's a bass player. I don't think it's underrated. I think so. Bass is important, but for the most part, the bass player is like the simplest part of the rhythm section. The action brick. Hey, David, what do you think constitutes a good second act? So a good second act is mostly going to be characters, I think. That's when the characters really get to do their growth and make all their decisions for the third act in a movie or in a book. So let's look at Empire Strikes Back. Lots of people love Empire Strikes Back. Empire Strikes Back is mostly characters with the plot very light. So the second act is just Luke training and Han and Leia running away from Darth Vader through asteroid fields to get to Cloud City and stuff. That's the second act. They are growing together. Han and Leia begin a romance. Luke is struggling with his training. And then everything snaps in the third act when Luke has to go fight Vader. Han gets frozen in carbonite, all that stuff happens. So the second act, it's mostly characters interacting. And if you write good characters, that's your chance to really let them shine. Okay, to really let the characters have their moments is in that second act. What are your opinions on the book Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse? I don't know if I've read it all the way through, so I don't really have opinions now. I think it was. I'm confused as to my memory of it, so I'd have to look at it again. Sometimes that happens. I'm not gonna pretend that I remember it. So I don't know if I read it actually. Thanks for the suggestions. I'll look into them. Okay, great. Fahrenheit 451 has good ideas, but its anti-TV ranting can get very cringy. It's good though. I rant against TV. He saw very early that TV as a passive input just brainwashes people to oblivion. That's what's great about YouTube. You're typing something and I'm responding to it. It's like a two-way thing. Information goes both ways. Siddhartha was the real name of the Buddha. Okay. That's where I'm recognizing the name. I don't think I've read the Hermann Hesse book then. I don't think I read it. So I don't know. But yeah, you're right. Siddhartha was the real name of the Buddha. I'm remembering that now. Thank you for reminding me that. I don't know that much about the Buddha. I know what's the other one? That's the hand. There's another related religion that I'm remembering. Has another Buddha-like character. Anyway, is it purely the adrenaline rush, shock, fear that draws people to horror? I think it's the emotional high. Yeah, I think it is. I often wonder... Oops, skip down. Sorry. I often wonder if something else is lurking deep inside. I think it's mostly the emotional high. I think it's mainly that. Deeper things, of course, that's going to have a bigger impact, but I think as a genre, it's mostly about the fear and the shock, the emotional high from that. What are your thoughts on Art Deco? I like it, I guess. It's okay. It's not my favorite aesthetic system. I like the Baroque. The Baroque is what I like. I like Baroque furniture. I like Baroque music. I like Baroque painting. I like crap from the 17th century. I'm a 17th century man. Thanks for answering this question, good sir. You are welcome. Have you read the Deathstalker series? I haven't. Oh, I missed a super chat from Kaku. You make revisions sound like multiple wounds. Multiple gunshot or stab wounds. Revisions. It is. So when you revise something, this is purely my opinion. It's purely my opinion. If you revise something yourself, or you have other people edit it and revise it, there is a somewhat mystical. There's the touch of a creator on something, and it's slightly mystical. It's not really quantifiable. Something about the creator articulating his vision. Now, you need to usually do revisions because you haven't articulated your vision clearly in some cases, or you include things which are not appropriate that you can understand after the fact. But if you do too much rewriting, if you say, well, I can just rewrite this, the things which drove the original writing become excised from it. And so you end up with a very dry piece of art once you do too many revisions or too many iterations. It ends up becoming a technical work that misses the character of the original. And I think this is true with stories. And it could be true with paintings as well, but I'm not a painter, so I don't know. A lot of painters will paint things like 3 times to get all of their planning and stuff correct before they paint the final version. They'll do revisions of it, which is fine. Each time you revise it, but if you give yourself some leeway to have those touches, you're missing the creative energy when you rewrite too many times. So yes, it can kill your story. Stephen King says to kill your darlings, but you can kill your story if you do too much editing. I actually really do believe that. So some people, they take their first book and they're revising it for years and it just never feels good to them. It's like it never feels as good as when they first wrote it, and it's like it kind of never will be, because the feelings that inspired those first sentences, those sentences when you first wrote them, they're not there when you rewrite it. You're not feeling like love or your fear or anger. You're not feeling the chill on your spine when you write about it the third time you're doing it. So you can improve the technical qualities of it. But, for me, if I feel emotion when I'm rereading something I've written, then I know that I need to leave that alone as much as possible and only tweak the things that just need to be tweaked to make it perfect. So when I edit, I do sometimes big edits. I'll delete scenes. But usually it's all about execution. It's getting those little things right. Is this the right dialogue for this moment? I haven't read Deathstalker. Abrams said they were writing episode 7 as they were filming. It shows. You can see where they changed the movie when you watch it. Have you ever read any Star Wars novels? Back in the day, yes. I think the Thrawn trilogy, I remember being really good. I read some other ones I didn't like, too. How many people should I let review my book before making revisions? And how many revisions should I make? There is no correct answer to that. So, the first mistake people make when they write let's say you've written your first book. I'm not going to say the first mistake. A mistake people make when they write their first book, and this is a mistake I myself has made. So, when I say it's a mistake, chances are I've made that mistake and suffered for it and had to learn. So, I'm trying to give you the easy way. They give it to a friend that they think has the capacity to give them feedback on it. Or they join a writing group. And writing groups can be good or bad, but a lot of newer authors or people that are looking to do this on a higher level, they join a writing group hoping to get that feedback to make them better. The thing is, the writing group and your family is not your audience. Your friends are not your audience. What do I mean by that? Well, let's say you join a writing group of people and this person's you're writing a fantasy book, this other person's writing a horror book, this person's writing a romance novel, and you all trade. Nobody likes the book that they're having to read. It's a chore. Those aren't your genres. What you really need feedback from are people who like to read in the genre, read books like your book. So if you're writing a fantasy book, you need to find people who like to read fantasy to read it if you want feedback. And you really want reader feedback because readers will actually focus on different things from writers. If you were to hand me something, and because I'm an experienced writer, I will focus on different things than a reader would. And I may miss things that are really... Whoa! Hey. Quiet. I heard it too. It's okay. Nothing's going to hurt you. Yeah. Shh. Good girl. Anyway. I'm always surprised when I read reviews of my books what things people liked and didn't like, or when they give me feedback like, man, I really like this character. And I'm like, I didn't even really, he wasn't my favorite character. He was just kind of something I needed functionally. And so it's really good to get that kind of feedback because it's sometimes unexpected. So if you were to give me it, I would focus on like technical things like, this scene's too long, there's too much dialogue here. And none of that may actually matter to a reader. To a reader, it's like, man, I really hated that you chose to do this with this character. So one of the things I got, it's like, I really hated that you made Paradin. Oh, I don't want to give you spoilers for Water of Awakening. I really hate that you made this guy do this thing that I didn't like. He needed to do it functionally. So sometimes it's fine, but other times you don't know. So that's the thing. Your friends are not your audience. You got to find people that are actually going to like the book to actually give you feedback on it. The other thing about letting people review your book is it your book? Who are you trying to satisfy? What are you trying to make? And what do you hope to get out of the review? Because a lot of times people are looking for, some externalization of whether they were successful with what they did. That's really what I want. I want people to know if I was successful with my artistic intent. Other people are just, wanting to know what to change. And if it ceases to be your artistic work, if it's not what you want it to be, you're not going to love it the same way. This is why I don't let a lot of people read my books ahead of time, especially nowadays. I've been burned by people in the past with it. I'll talk about it some other time or in a piece of content dedicated to this. But I really want it to be the product that I envision in my mind before anybody else gets it. And if I get it good enough like that, then I actually don't care if people like it. I know that's if you're in the fandom menace or whatever, and it's all about like consumers have a right to say they don't like something, it's fine. You don't have to like my book. And the truth is, if you don't like my book, I actually don't care. I don't care whether you like it or hate it. I really care whether the book was what I wanted it to be. And feedback that helps me know if I need to tweak something for it to be what I want it to be is more important than I just didn't like this. It's like, I don't care. Cool. Don't read the sequel. Don't ever read my books again. I don't want you to read books that you don't like, right? So if you don't like my books, that's fine. Read books that you do like. I don't care. What I really care about is that if it's my product, I care about it more than the commercial success. In fact, I don't really care about commercial success. I would rather have it be more my product and be satisfied and happy with it and make less money than have it be some homogenized genre book that is bland that more people like and more people buy or makes me more money. I'd rather have it be my art. And a lot of the artists that I respect do that. That's why I like Darkthrone. You never know what Darkthrone's going to come out with. They don't tour. They don't care about making money. They work at the post office. I know Fenris at least works at the post office and comes out with an album every year, every other year. They come out with a new album that's exactly the music that they love writing and performing. And that's why I love Darkthrone. Even if the album's not my favorite, there's a creative touch to it that cannot be replicated. And I'm going to do a review of the new Darkthrone record. It's really good, called Old Star. If you like traditional heavy metal or old school black metal like Venom, Merciful Fate, it's great. Thing about it, I'm actually running out of time, so I need to wrap this up. Thing about it is, it's totally their artistic vision, and it's not perfect production, but who cares? It preserves what matters about it. So that's what I care about. Lastly, how many revisions should I make? If you plan and execute well in the drafting phase, you should make one revision. If you don't plan and execute well in the drafting phase, you should make as many revisions as you feel are necessary. There is no right answer. I think once you get past 3 significant revisions, like if you're doing a page 1 rewrite, you should only do that like 2 times or one time. One rewrite of a script is good, because after you do one page 1 rewrite, it's a different script. It's not the same. It's not a revision at that point. It's a rewrite. And then you can revise it a few more times. But after that, you're going to start wondering about, it's kind of like story algebra. There's a bunch of choices that line up, and you're going to try to make it too balanced, and you're going to lose the magic. You're going to lose the heart of the story. That's my opinion, and that's how I operate. That's what I do. I do one good revision, proofread it, put it out, correct the inevitable typos that happen later on. Let's see here. Let me keep going. Moxley, two-way communication is a big reason that I've come to like not only YouTube comments, but watch your streams and a couple of guys I like on Twitch. Absolutely. It's why I love YouTube. And it's why it makes me so upset and depressed that YouTube is choosing to do things which I think will harm its business. I want YouTube to be successful because it's amazing. It's amazing to have that comment section where you can talk to other people. You can talk to the creator. It's two ways. How do you talk to... You can't talk to Soledad O'Brien or someone unless she knows you, like some news personality. Can't even talk to Stephen King, but if you get to talk to me, you can talk to other people. It's great. Are you familiar with Night of the Hunter? I don't think so. No. Would the sequel trilogy have been better if Rian Johnson had directed all three films? Oh, I don't know. That is a great question. Now, that's not one that I've ever considered. Would the sequel trilogy have been better if Rian Johnson directed all three films? I don't think it would have been. It would have been more consistent, but I think it would have been worse. I don't think he likes Star Wars. I think J.J. Abrams likes Star Wars, but is just... I don't think he's super competent. I don't think he's the right guy to write the movie. He could be maybe a good director. Have someone else write do all the story work, essentially. I've just noticed the Hello Kitty guitar behind you. Yes, that is an authentic Hello Kitty Strat. Spielberg wasn't the original director of Jaws. The original director, who the producers refused to name, was fired almost immediately after he said, "I always wanted to make a movie about a whale." Revisions how Hollywood does it. It's more likened to Too Many Cooks in the Kitchen. Absolutely. What are your thoughts on Jules Verne? I like Jules Verne's stories. I haven't read one in a long time, but I like them. Action Brick. Let's see. Nope. Clayton Payne. I painted a lot, and it's true. The stuff folks like most, I tweaked the least. And that's it, you tweak the things that make the details right, but the things which evoke emotion, you don't want to touch those. What do you think of Tolkien's idea that as God is created by nature and man is made in his image, man desires to create out of nothing, which can only be achieved through fiction? I agree totally. Tolkien's view on creation is basically my view of creation. We're a reflection of God, and so that includes his desire to create. People create in all kinds of ways. We make houses. We have children. We create new beings called children, which we then are responsible for, just as God is, in a way, cares for us. So all of our lives are a reflection of our nature with God. And that's totally my view on it. And that's kind of the beauty of it. Question for you about the inability to monetize old videos and YouTube stealing your money. Have you considered just re-uploading old videos? I have done that, actually. So with certain copyright claimed videos, I've re-uploaded them. And then I found that more people watched the re-uploaded version than watched the old version for whatever reason. So I've done it a couple times. You're not supposed to do that, though. You can actually get your channel banned if you re-upload the same content multiple times. That's actually, you're not supposed to do that. So I've done it a couple times, but usually I make the original private because it's like, I can't get away with it, Dome Girl says, thank you for your help and advice. You are absolutely welcome. Rusty Heckler says, consistently worse. Let's see here. Who would be better suited to write Star Wars films? Well, you had Kasdan write Solo. Lawrence Kasdan, who wrote Empire Strikes Back, and you'd think that would be a really good choice. It was okay, but it just wasn't that good. I think you have to have a George Lucas around. I think you have to start with a George Lucas treatment, have George Lucas executive produce or something, just to keep the story in line. I'd rather have like Frank Oz direct. Frank Oz is a good director. He's got skin in the game because he's Yoda. Yeah, I would rather have Frank Oz. And I thought Ron Howard actually was not a bad choice to fix Solo, because he has history with Lucas. He's kind of a Lucas guy. Thought he'd have skin in the game. Solo was okay. It definitely could have been better, and it was not the movie that I would have made. But there's definitely good things about Solo. Abrams seems to really enjoy the visual imagery of Star Wars more than writing a Star Wars story. I agree. And I think that's... The aesthetics of Star Wars are very important, but Disney seems to think that they are the only important thing. Anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here for tonight. I'm really tired, and my throat's starting to hurt. So thanks so much for watching, and thanks for giving me all the chats. Voices of the Void will be out soon. You're going to get it free on the list if you're part of the list, so make sure you're on it, deviouspress.com/list, and I'll have some links so you can see and read this particular work of fiction that I crafted. I wrote almost the entirety of this book. I'll talk a little bit about the book before I go. Some other technical things. I wrote almost the entirety of the book after midnight. So my current sleep schedule is I do my family stuff till 9 o'clock at night when it's my son's bedtime. My wife will go put him down for bed because since my daughter's been born, he's been feeling like he doesn't have enough mommy attention, and we talked about it. So mommy helps him brush his teeth, helps him go to sleep. I hold my daughter and play with her or tend to her needs. Then my wife goes to sleep with my daughter, and by that time it's 10 or 11 o'clock at night. I go to the gym and I work out for an hour, or I go run a 5 or a 10K, depending on how good I feel, one of those, and how sore my legs are. I come back, eat a meal, then I write or I work on my book. And so usually I'm starting the book in the middle of the night and it's completely quiet and the neighborhood's dead. And it's creepy. It's creepy to write it. And I turn off all the lights and the room's dark, and I wrote the book. I wrote this book. This book is one scene. It's 25,000 words of one scene. There are no scene breaks in it. And where there would be scene breaks, instead you just have some reference to passage of time, and you're not even sure how much time is passing because the character's unsure if he's conscious through all of the time. So technically it's an interesting book because it is a non-stop like horror fest with no scene breaks. It just goes from like one thing into the next. So there's a bunch of rising tension, then finally some really gross stuff starts to happen. Things get crazier and crazier until the very end. So it feels like an action movie or horror movie in book form. That's how I like to think of it. And that's kind of how I wrote it. So it should be interesting. If you don't like it, that's okay. I don't really know if people are going to like this or if my current audience is going to care at all about horror, but you never know. Like, everyone may read it and be like, this is cool. It's just like reading, like, it's Lovecraft meets Aliens. It's Cthulhu and Aliens combined. It's awesome. I love it. I think people who like Aliens or Alien are going to like this. People who like Lovecraft will like it. Okay. Shh. I heard it too. Shh. You don't have to bark. My dog's telling me it's time to quit. So thanks, guys, and I will see you. I'll see you all next time.